Morning everyone, I'll just kick the meeting off with the karakia. Kia tau, ngā manakitanga a te mea naro, kia runga, te tēnā o tātou, kia mahia, te hua, makiki, kia toi te kupa, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu, kia whakamaua, kia tīna, kuia, taiki. Let the strength and life force of our ancestors be with each and every one of us, freeing our path from obstruction so that our words, spiritual power, love and language are upheld, permanently fixed, established and understood. Forward together. Welcome along to meeting on the shortest day of the year, so it's all up or downhill from here, whichever way you look at it, 21st of June. So I'll kick off with the house. Nothing worse than hearing you. Is that what I sound like? So the toilets are located outside the chamber, directly on the right. If we need to evacuate, please exit down the stairwell, and assembly is out on Space Street. And an earthquake, drop cover and hold. If we could please turn our phones onto silent. And just a reminder that these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, you are consenting to being filmed or viewing by the public. We've got a very full agenda today, so hopefully we can get through it in good time. And I will call for apologies. We've got one from Councillor Green, who may be able to attend to the this is here.
Rob, it was about 4, probably to leave unless a community board.
I'll move that to the chair. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Chamberlain. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Do we have any further requests for leave of absence? Councillor Running-Claw?
The 7th of June to the 9th of July.
Is that extra for the ones we would?
Yep.
27 June to 9 July.
Thank you.
Any further leave of absence? Councillor Keith?
From the 23rd of July to the 5th of August.
Nothing further. Would someone like to move that those leave of absence be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. Councillor Fraser? All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Right, do we have any conflicts of interest today for any items on the agenda? Councillor Running-Claw?
7.14, requesting ownership of the whole property.
Thank you. Someone like to move that we accept that?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Vaporai, seconded by Councillor Keast. All in favour?
Aye.
Carried. I don't believe there's any extraordinary or urgent items.
No.
Right, so that moves us on to the confirmation of the council minutes from our meeting held on the 31st of May on page 8 and the extraordinary meeting on the 7th of June on page 16. So someone like to move that those are true and correct?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Fragan, Councillor Keast. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? It's carried. Okay, we now have public participation, and we have Mr. Turner here to address the council. So I'll just remind councillors that it's you'll have 5 minutes to speak, and then questions only of the speaker, not a platform for debate or anything. And I'll welcome Mr. Turner up to the table at the end there. Come on. And I believe we've all got the report circulated.
Firstly, Mayor and Councillors, thanks for the opportunity to come and to present to you. For those that you don't know me, my name's Pete Turner, and with Paul we operate Riverfield Farms up near Mosburn. We have about 100 hectares of plantings throughout the farm on shelter belts. A number of these have received subsidies in the past from Environment Southland for synthetic value, and we've also got 100 hectares of forestry in blocks. So I'm here to outline the problems of the council decision that all tree trimming within 30 metres of a road must have council certified independent traffic management. I acknowledge that this is required on some roads, but on remote rural roads, it's just adding cost and there's no real benefit to any ratepayer. We found that out this year when our tree trimming operator arrived with a machine to complete our regular maintenance, which we do about a week of, and he was able to do any tree trimming, so within 30 metres of the road. So he had to come back 10 days later with all his traffic management team. So just to outline the problems with this, I'll just go through a couple of main points. Is that there's been actually no correspondence to ratepayers from the council requiring this traffic management for tree trimming. Bruce Dickens Tree Trimming, who a lot of people use, have been used to spread the message and deal with the frustration of ratepayers when they don't know anything about this. The second one is, now the requirement for this traffic management had been recommended by central government. I've spoken to some of the staff and they've informed how this came about. Neither tree trimming or rural roads were involved in the example that was given of why this has been implemented. So I think there needs to be a little bit of looking there. We had the cost for the traffic management for us was $2,000. We had them there for 12 hours. They actually only did 8 hours of tree trimming. We spent another 4 hours shifting up the road and the rest of it. And during that 12-hour period that we had them on farm, for the cost of $3,000, we had one vehicle that came through our traffic management system. Now, I understand Bruce Dickens are the largest, they're contracted to do the council work, and look, they're experts and do a great job in what they're doing. And they're having to retain their business. They've had to do this, which is understandable, but farmers have done a lot of this in the past. Council informed me that this procedure will only take 1 day, but in fact it took Bruce Dickens a lot longer. It's a 1-day seminar, and it took him, by the time they get the gear and got signed off, it was another 3 or 4 days that they had to come toing and froing. So they said it was about a 4 or 5 day process. So a lot of one-man operators don't have that ability to do that. They're on their own, and where Bruce Dickens has that ability, which is a credit to them, because I've got 7 or 8 machines that are operating. So I believe that there's a bit of inconsistency that's been with this. We've had 2 forestry crews that are up near our property, and neither of them have had traffic management, independent traffic management. In one case they had no traffic management. So there's an inconsistency of how it's being employed. And I believe that there's a serious health and issue to its rate from the council at ratepayers. If the weather's not favourable on the Pacific Day for completing the work, there's an encouragement to do it, because that's the day that's been assigned 10 days out or whenever it is. I mean, I know there can be shifts in those days, but when they come along and you know that you've got tree trimming to do, they can line that up. Bruce and them can line that up with what they're doing on farm, whereas in this case it's got to be on a Pacific day, and then you've got to can it and do it for the next day. And if it is wet and undesirable like it is at present during the winter to do this, you can have issues with if they have to go onto the road or the road verge. One of the main issues I think is that a lot of farmers now aren't maintaining, due to this rule, they're not maintaining, they can't afford the cost all the time. They're not going to maintain their trees, and like we saw on the 26th of May in the Mosman area, there's trees fell over the road, and I think there's a health and risk there of they need to be maintained, but there needs to be encouragement for them to be maintained. Farmers up to this year have completed this themselves on the rural roads without any issues, and that's why I believe a possible solution is getting a one-pager. I'm happy to work with the council to go through with this, but get a one-pager or something like, that the road that's affected, the time frame to complete, how they do traffic management. I think there is some, work to be done there with them. Most farmers have significant public liability, so they're covered for these events regardless. So if a tree does fall down and they don't know about it, they're covered anyway. So I think, And the question I have, that a lot of farmers are concerned about once they're known about this is that, a lot of farmers shift stock on the roads, rural roads, so they have the traffic management in place. They know how to do it, reasonably experienced at it, and I think if this rule continues on and we need to have independent traffic management for shifting stock in the future, I think there'll be some, I won't be the only one here, I think there'll be a lot of people here. I could probably fill this whole chamber up if in that situation. But so look, I'm happy to work with the council to try and get something suitable, but I believe the current process that we're working through is going to cause a lot of issues for the council moving forward. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Just a question from me before I open it to the floor. Are you aware that the legislation is actually set by government in Wellington that we actually have to enforce as a council?
Yep, I have. The council staff have informed me that it has come down, but like anything, I believe that you've got delegation within yourself.
So have you approached government at all with any of these?
With this, no. I've come here for the first call is here because I believe that we should discuss it around here first, set a policy. If the policy can't be changed, then you can, then maybe it's got to go to central government. I don't know, but this is a first port of call because a lot of farmers don't even know about this, or people on rural roads, they don't even know about it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yep. Councillor Chambers.
So all the people on the back, Pete, that signed it, they all farmers, are they?
They're all ratepayers, or with the exception of a couple, they manage properties for ratepayers. So they're all just in their area. I did it for a couple of hours, just shot around ratepayers and got them to, would they approve this, or are they supportive of this? And every single one of them were 100% behind it.
So if it was across Southland, there would be quite a number of farmers that would be affected by this.
Oh, 100%. And like one guy there, none of those people knew about the rule. There was only one guy that did, and he'd had the tree trimming people in there earlier, and he was unable to, they had to leave. Tree trimming guy organised to come. He showed him what they had to do, which is the same guy we used. He said, look, I can't do it, which is Bruce Dickens. And so they had to leave, so now he's in the process of trying to organise the time. He doesn't believe there will be a time now because we're into the winter. Getting that organised is going to have to wait till the spring. So, but none of those people there knew of this change of ruling, none of them.
Yeah, I'd have to know that we as councillors, as a farmer councillor, I wouldn't have even known about it either. So,
any further questions? Councillor Wilson?
I'm just wondering when the change actually came about. Do you know, Pete?
No, I don't. I mean, we did this in December, and that has been implemented there. I believe Bruce Dickens and them, I don't know for a fact, but I believe they had to do it some 12 months ago, when they had to, were told by council, because they do about 25%, I believe, of their businesses for the council doing roads, and they had to get that implemented to do those main roads, which is understandable, but there is a difference here between main roads going out of Otago and rural remote roads.
And this is specifically tree trimming on the private land, but close to road. It's not actually roadside tree trimming. This is.
It's a bit of both, councillor. It's any tree within 30 metres of a road is unable to be trimmed or done anything with the exception of getting independent traffic management. So Bruce Dickens went and got, because he's got 7 or 8 machines, they do a really good job, don't get us wrong, and they're very skilled at what they do, but they had to go, continue with 25%, they had to go and do that course. So Anton had to go and do it, and stated there how long it took them to get it through.
Yeah, my understanding, councillor, is that legislation changed last year sometime for any roadside work, and it was changed. But any further questions, councillor Duffy?
Could I perhaps ask a staff member if they know, with the contractor approvals, can it be interchangeable between, say, us and the state highway, or us and or Clutha, that if a contractor is approved under one entity, that it would apply across the board, given that our requirements would all be much the same?
Chief Executive, do you want to?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, yeah, it's probably a hard question to answer in this context, so councillor, we can look at that down the track. Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Pete. It sounds like all the farmers are going to have to be approved traffic management contractors, if they're going to move stock down the roads?
Is there a question, councillor, just noting?
Well, it's a question for perhaps the chief executive, is how can we streamline that process? If this is a rule from government, how do we streamline the process of getting everyone up to speed with traffic management? Otherwise, we're accepting a cost that's...
We're straying away from...
I think just we're straying away from the
Should I ask Pete that question?
Well, it's not a question directed at Pete, so we'll flag that one for now. Sorry, councillor.
Why is that? That's part of a potential solution.
But it's not a question directly related to this. The rules of public participation are questions of the. You can ask the submitter that question.
Thank you, Pete, for your submission. Do you think it's feasible that all the farmers across the district get certified as far as traffic management goes?
I don't think they need to be certified, I'll be honest. I think that farmers now, when they shift stock, they'll have somebody in front and they'll have somebody behind. We know the rules, they've got to have hazard lights, gear and all the rest of things on, gear. I mean, it's no different to what we've done. We've done this with tree trimming in the past, so I don't think it needs to be. To cover the council, I believe that how it could be done is that there's a one-pager sent in, and I'll just use the example of tree trimming. I look to tree trim these in the month of December on this road. This is what I'm going to do. This is my public liability. It ticks all those boxes that or Bruce Dickens' company has to do. And then the farmer can do it when the tree trimmer arrives and do it effectively. And if there is a problem, the farmer's liable. I mean, somebody's got to have accountability, and generally at the end of the day, it should be the farmer or the people completing. It's no different to anything else. So I think we're taking responsibility in council away. So yeah. But to be certified, no, I don't think every farmer needs to be certified. You won't get every farmer certified, because we haven't got the time, we've got the money to go through this course that I've been told is what's got to go through.
Cool. Just in the interest of time, I'll take a final question from Councillor O'Brien.
Through you, Your Worship. Peter, you were talking about a one-pager and you're very much solution-based. Yeah. As part of our long-term plan in the council in the technology space, we're going to have some changes in technology, which means that we're going to rely more on online services. Yep. There'll be less face-to-face interaction. There'll be automated ways of resolving issues and so on, problem solving. My question to you is, could existing online tools be used to streamline, assume liability, hazard register, etc., under the guise of the Health and Safety Act? For example, using something like Site Docs or Zero Harm Farm.
Well, if you look at insurance companies, we do that now. If you put an insurance claim in, you can do that online, and you admit your liability and everything. So there's numerous technology out there, and the way technology is moving, there's no doubt that it can be done with technology. So I think, yeah, there's no reason.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. It could be done online, without a doubt. Yep. And I think it should be done online, because farmers and people can do it when they need to do it, and tick the boxes.
Thank you, and thank you for coming along. And
thank you. Thanks for hearing us, and good luck. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now move on to the first item on our agenda, which is item 7.1, the adoption of the annual plan 23-24. And Emma, and Nicole. So this report follows on from our finance and assurance meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I'll hand over to the team to
Councillors, we're here to present the annual plan report. Emma and Nicole and myself. Emma and Nicole are going to speak to the financial information and some of the The annual plan 2023-24 was presented to the Finance and Insurance Committee on the 7th of June for recommendation to Council for adoption. I will take the report as read. Council have received feedback from 10 people and organisations, and at the Finance and Assurance meeting, Mr Fraser and Mr Rose from Federated Farmers spoke to the feedback that they had provided. The majority of the feedback reflected the current cost of living and the impact on low-income earners. The feedback also highlighted the escalating costs to farmers and the difficulty of finding information required to inform the feedback. There are a few issues that come up also within the feedback that staff feel would be useful for council to have some further context around. One of those being the sources of funding for projects was not clear. So a project sheet including the funding sources will be added to the annual plan. The Strategic Assets Reserve, in terms of the issues raised around the purpose and the use of the Strategic Asset Reserve, the original sale of South Roads started with a reserve of 10.6 million. There were no restrictions on the use of that money. Council at the time decided to offset the roading rate with the interest, which is still happening today. The reserve has been used over the last few years to repay rate loan balances, offset water and roading rates. As noted use in the planning documents. There was an option to use funds in the Around the Mountain cycle trail in 2016-17. However, after consultation and the submission process, it was agreed to loan fund instead, and this is rated for by use of the uniform annual general charge. The split of rates and the rate funding for general water and waste, Nicole will provide some context shortly for that. However, before we go to there, council staff have acknowledged the feedback and thank our respondents for the time taken to provide that feedback. The feedback will also be used to inform the next long-term plan, 2024-34. The final version of the adopted annual plan will go up onto the website. Staff is just still working through some changes that have been picked up while things have been picked up while proofing the document, just some minor things in there. So I can over to Nicole.
Yeah. So on the hub, I've just loaded up an extra document. Just in terms of, we just thought it would be useful for you to have some context around some of the submitters' points around the who's paying all of the rates and the different people, because they've raised a few points in there, and we think it's useful to give you wider context around the whole total rate situation. So you remember we've been working on the LTP. We've been talking about how activities are funded. And you'll remember we talked about the 5-step process, or 2-step process, which is really looking at things like the benefits of the activity, looking at exacerbator pays, anybody causes costs, the timing of when the benefits occur from an activity, whether we should fund an activity separately. There's a whole bunch of things that we think about when we think about how an activity is funded, and we do that through the revenue and financing policy process. And we think about all of that bit of detail, and then we go away and we think, overall, are we happy with how we're funding our activities overall? And we can make adjustments through that. We do that through that revenue and financing policy process. So there's quite a lot of policy thinking. We don't just come up with the rate structure and all of that sort of stuff out of the air. Now, I know the submitters have talked about 2 rates in particularly in their submission, and that was the roading rate and the general rate. But what we've just thought was be useful just to recap for you in this annual plan, who are the sectors that are sharing the rates and on what basis, just to provide you with that overall context, because they've just focused on 2 of those rates. So you can see on the screen there, the orange bars that are all clustered at the bottom, that's what I would that's the groupings of what I would consider rural ratepayers. So that's things like people who are involved in farming, with farming, land use, dairy, farming, forestry and mining. And so this is their share of total rates is in the orange, and then the more blue colours are what we would consider to be more the urban ratepayers. So you can see when it comes to overall rates, what we're doing in this annual plan is the right column on way over here, the 23-24 year. So we can see that total urban ratepayers are paying 59% of the total rates, and rural ratepayers are paying 41%, so at a total level. And so we've just look a little bit more into, and you can see, sorry, this is showing how over time that's changed. So we've just looked back about 8 years, and you can see that over time, the portion has been moving more towards urban than it has been to rural. Okay, and some of that's to do with the fact that residential properties have been having higher capital value increases than rural sectors.
I may interrupt you.
Yeah.
Rural and urban. What is the percentage divide of the population? You split the rates. So how much is of a population do you consider rural?
Well, the number of property number thing, and I have got that somewhere else, and I'll come back to it.
For me to come to the context,
I'll answer that at the. If we look then at, so sometimes when we organise our rates, we talk about district rates, local rates, service rates, and so this is exactly the same information, but looking at district rates are the ones that everybody pays, and that's the general rate, heritage rate, roading rate, waste management rate, stormwater rate, that we've had over time. And you can see there, again, similar trend that we've talked about. There's been the urban sector is paying 44% and the rural sector is paying 56%, and that's because about around half of these rates are collected on a capital value basis. So the rural sector is paying around similar to the general rate. On the local rate basis, we don't use any capital value, so capital value is not playing any role to play in terms of the split of rates for the local rates. So they're done on a fixed basis, but we do have a differential that we introduced in 21. So you can see that in these years here, I've got to read it, my eyesight, I really need to get tested. The urban sector was paying about 80% of local rates and the rural sector was 20%. And then when we brought in the 2021 LTP, we changed a few things and we created a differential for rural, and we moved some of our costs to the general rate. And so that effectively dropped the portion that the rural sector is paying. So there's just been a change in trend, and then it's been pretty static since then. And then over on the service rates, which are things for rubbish, water, sewage, that's pretty much been static at 90% of that's paid by urban type properties and 10% from rural properties. And that's largely because mainly the rural sector for that is really for rubbish. They're on the recycling collection route and they pay towards rubbish. And so the rates that the submitters were talking about were these two rates. So they picked these two out, and so they had the general rate there, and so you can see that that's pretty split even 52, 48% between the two sectors. But again, that's been changing over time. The portion that the rural sector's been paying has been declining over time. And also with the roading rate, they pay a higher proportion of the roading rate at 71%, and that's because we have that roading rate differential that we've talked about. But again, the capital value thing has been having an impact here, and so that portion that the rural sector's been paying has been declining. So there's just all I wanted to do really today was to talk to you, because they'd focused on these two rates here, and I just wanted to give you the context of the overall rating structure. And I think I'd made the comment when we've been working through some of the revenue and financing policy that it's generally pretty even, but you can see that overall the portion that the urban sector's paying has been increasing over time, and the portion that the rural sector's been paying has been as a proportion of total rates. So it was just to provide that context in terms of. They did also, in their submissions, talk about the fact that there's some general rate funding going into water and wastewater, and so I just wanted to provide some context around that as well. So essentially, we like I said, we make those decisions in our funding policy about who benefits and who pays and how they should pay. And that policy has identified that there are some benefits to water and wastewater to the whole community in terms of environmental protection, public health, And so from the policy thinking point of view, we've acknowledged the fact that there is some benefit of these activities to the community as a whole. And we've also, when we did the LTP last time, we also made a change to how our corporate activities are funded. So previously, basically what I'm saying is the portion of funding that's sitting in I'm going to flip to it and yell at me. But in your annual plan, you'll see there's a funding impact statement for wastewater, and you'll see it's got a general rate income of 1.1 million. Okay, so everybody's paying towards that, and then a targeted rate portion of 6.3 million, which gives us some other sources of funding, which is giving us 7.7 million. And this portion here actually relates to corporate overhead costs. So things like the cost of me, the cost of IT, the cost of offices, that sort of cost. That's what that's paying for as well. And just in the 23-24 year, there's a portion of loan repayments that we're doing on wastewater and water loans that were taken out originally. Council made a third contribution, and that water entities have asked us to include that in this particular financial statement in this annual plan. So previous to the LTP in 2021, all of these corporate costs actually went through different activity statements. They went through district leadership. So you didn't see a general rate contribution in here. But it's because we removed corporate activities, or the activity from our LTP as an activity on its own, we spread it across all of the different activities, and that's why you're seeing it. So it was just essentially a change in the way we grouped our activities. And as a result of that, we haven't suddenly introduced general rate funding for this activity. It's always been there. It's just that the way we're showing the costs. So previously these were in a different activity and now they're,
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah.
The targeted rate for wastewater, how targeted is that? If we
So that is in terms of, we've defined those areas that have access to the wastewater system, and then those people in those areas pay that rate.
Yarnell, for example, pays for their system.
So
Targeted, is it?
So it's not. So the way that the targeted rate works is that everybody who's in an area with wastewater across the Southland District pays the same amount. So it doesn't matter if you're in Te Anau or Winton or Tuatapere. If you're in a defined wastewater area, you will pay the same rate.
So I think this is where that submission was sort of touching on as well, and you've mentioned it, who receives the benefit and who pays, and then there's some policy thinking that goes into it. So who's receiving the benefit doesn't actually pay the full amount of what they're receiving, do they? If we consider the Te Anau wastewater as an example, Te Anau doesn't pay for their wastewater in total.
No. So when council reviewed or has done its funding policy decisions, in 2015, they made a clear decision that they wanted to move away from each individual scheme paying for their own costs to it being a district-wide activity that those people who can connect or are in the area that can connect pay. And that's been a consistent approach that council has had every LTP since. So it was first introduced, I think, it might have been 2012 actually. And so it's been a consistent way that we've funded it. Now council can change that.
Oh, good.
Every LTP process, and you go through, when we talk about the revenue and financing policy and we talk about how we do our rating, we can amend that. But that has been the consistent approach that we've had since then. And so we've applied the rate as set up in the LTP.
Sorry, and the farmers will be paying 10% towards that Te Anau scheme, for example.
So on this table here on the right, so we've just taken that total 1.1 million, and this general rate funding, remember I've said it's collected, whatever those splits were up above, I've said that rural is paying about 48% of the general rate. Right, so when we take that 48% and we split it across the land use sectors, it means rural's paying about 6.7% of the wastewater costs, which are being used to fund the overhead corporate costs of IT, finance, my time, everybody's, what we consider the corporate support costs of running the council.
So just to clarify, Councillor, it's not the pipes and anything like that, it's just the overhead costs of the district storage.
Yeah, like I said, these corporate support costs used to be through a different activity and solely funded in there. And when that activity was removed, these costs were spread through the whole LTP. But there's been essentially no change. It's always been general rate, still general rate. It's just how it shows in the budget document.
Yes, it's just getting a wee bit murkier, isn't it? I mean, going forward, I shouldn't use that term, but it could be, we could apply some more focus to who's benefiting and who's paying.
So that's
be a lot more accurate with the way
which is a long-term plan.
So that's the discussion that we have when we work on the policy and we bring that back and we work through that process. Yeah. And so that's the time that you would debate that. At the moment, we're applying the rating as per the policy that we've got that's been adopted.
It's actually been very broken down quite granularly compared to how this has been done in other parts. So we've got sort of full transparency there around how everything kind of works, which is, again, a long-term plan discussion to work on. But yeah, we've got the information in front of us, which is good.
It's broken down into lots of bits, and then we start tinkering it and make it blurry. So we've got the ability to be...
We'll carry on, Nicole.
No worries, I just want to provide that context.
Sorry, Councillor Duffy.
I just asked Nicole, is it true too that on top of that initial part that the whole is in the general rate to do with wastewater, there's also the likes of schools, halls and libraries and public toilets that actually are available to the whole community that are based in urban areas, which means that there needs to be some wider contribution to that than just in the urban area. Is that true?
Yes, I think so.
I feel I should point out too that when we were on individual areas paying their own wastewater rate. Places like Nightcaps and Tokanui were massively more expensive per house than what, and this was largely the reason why it was put district-wide.
Cool, carry on.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council members. Subsequent to the 8th of March Council meeting, the following factors have resulted in changes to the financial statements and the reduction of the average rate increase from 7.84 to 7.61. They are the Government Better Off initiatives of $3.5 million, the revaluation of roading and 3 waters assets and $8 million impact on depreciation, wastewater maintenance contracts reduced by $430,000, and the 22-23 forecasting changes signed off by Council has increased it by $277,000. We also did a budget review, which has increased it by $27,000, and $2.5 million of bridge projects revenue and reserves moved from 22-23, which had no impact on rates. We adjusted the loan costs for the delayed Stewart Island Ulva Jetty and Tiano stormwater upgrade projects, and audit fees increased by $100,000. So overall, rates are budgeted to increase by $4.5 million, average of 7.61% over the prior year. The key changes to rates are similar to March and include higher interest of $1.2 million, which was a slight decrease from $1.3 million, the removal of $1 million reserve funding for wastewater, and the increase in waste collection costs of $800,000. So 2 significant changes since March are the increase in capital expenditure program and the revaluation of assets. The capital expenditure program has increased by $10 million. This has significantly increased the capital expenditure program and the risk of not delivering the program. And staff are currently working through our proposed prioritisation process, and this will be discussed with Council shortly. The second one was the 2022 revaluation of assets and the impact on depreciation. So the impact of the 2022 revaluation has increased the asset values by around $523 million and the annual depreciation by around $8 million. An additional $3.75 million or 6.34% in rates funding would be required to maintain the 2021 LTP timeframes and financial strategy objectives. This would have increased the rates from 7.61 to 13.95. So incorporating the full impact of depreciation would be significant and compound affordability issues for households in the current challenging economic environment with high inflation and cost of living increases. Staff are therefore proposing to continue to rate only the amount of depreciation included in the long-term plan. This will result in roading funding 75% of depreciation instead of the planned 90%, and 3 waters funding 45% instead of the planned 75%. In considering the financial prudence of this approach, staff note that Council would still be committed to fully funding depreciation over time. It would simply take longer to get to 100%. This has resulted in some proposed changes to the significant forecasting assumptions that are included in the resolutions. In addition, the decision to not adjust depreciation funding has increased the operating deficit and will therefore also delay the achievement of the balanced budget benchmark, which was anticipated to be 24-25 in the long-term plan, and is reviewed as part of the next LTP process. So at the Finance and Assurance meeting on the 7th of June, committee members discussed how the annual plan continues the LTP commitment to increase investment in Council's core assets and how important it is to maintain current assets, especially roads and bridges, and not push this cost onto future generations. Discussion was also held on the rate increase and the affordability challenges facing ratepayers. And while the decision to not fund the additional $8 million depreciation was considered financially prudent in the current environment, the committee members wished it acknowledged that this increased the risk of funding services in the future and will make the next LTP harder. So as suggested at that meeting, a section on depreciation has also been added to the annual plan document in section 1. Back to Robin and open to questions.
Thank you. And yeah, just a comment from me, adding that project sheet, I think it will be really valuable based on the feedback that we got, where people can actually see a list of all the projects that we're funding. So I think, will that have a bit of clarity around it for the likes of the nature of the projects, where there's a bit of confusion around the investigation part and the sort of delivery part, or will that still be, yeah, like the wharf and the walking track, where there's a bit of confusion around?
So we might, we're just doing that today actually, so I might look at the naming of the projects and make sure that they are clear.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondered if Councillor Boparai's question that she asked before around the population split? Did you have an answer?
I'm just opening a spreadsheet. It is quite large because I've got 8 years of data in it. It's nearly there, so.
I'll come back. And I guess just another comment around that capital expenditure increase, that would be directly related to the better funding, pretty much, wouldn't it? So this unexpected income coming in.
Like 1.7 million of it was better off funding, roading was 2.5, and 4.3 was the office building that was added back in. It was in the long-term plan, it was taken out and then put back in.
Right, I'll open up the floor for questions. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yep, my concern is, likes of this year, it's a increase in rates of 4-point-something million and borrowings of 9-point-something million. I'd just question and challenge how sustainable is that going forward? Where are we going to be in 10 years' time? What are the rates going to be? At this rate of increase, our ratepayers aren't going to be able to afford the rates going down the track. So, I guess we as councillors can't just rolling out year after year the same job, same thing. We're going to have to start, coming up with some innovative ideas, because this is not sustainable. No one in their business would adopt this model.
And it's a nationwide issue too,
I
Councillor.
I was heartened on the radio this morning that local governments, the review said that the councils are tapped out rate-wise, but that was encouraging. But
the majority of councils at the moment are actually looking at double-digit rates increases. So that doesn't make it any easier for us. But the problem isn't isolated to us. And I think as a sector, to back what you're saying, we need to look at different ways of getting funding for what we're doing, because it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Councillor Baker.
Through your worship, and I was on doing some calculations on similar lines what Derek just said, and as compared to our rates intake from 1920 this year to this year have gone up 24% from 55 million in 2019-2020 to this year wanting 68 million. That's massive, and we might think it's single digit, but we do need to recognize for many of the people when it's coming in, it will be a double digit figure, well into the double digits. We've had people last year with 25-30%. Tuatapere had something like an average increase of 18 to 20% per household. This is not sustainable here, and I think that's when more of the issues are going to come from people. Who's paying what? What am I getting for it? Like similar on the tones of those ones that come when we start having those sort of increases. That's when people are going to get really territorial. Where does this end? So we do need to be aware that Derek said there's really not a lot to be said.
And I think we'll see a real increase in people that are going to want help or renege on rates. I think you're going to see a real increase in that department.
Yeah.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'd just echo the sentiments that we're hearing here. 7.6% of that's a doubling of rates in less than 10 years. And that's obviously not sustainable, and I'm not looking to the staff or even chief exec. We have to look around this table and see what's changed. The default position seems to be every time some spending comes, we tick it off, more spending, rather than the default position being to not spend money. So something needs to change around this table, the thinking around here. And I keep going back to this Winton wastewater plant, 64 million, plus blowouts, 100 million. How many rating units are in Winton? We spread it across the district. There's no incentive to come up with ways to manage our budgets and our infrastructure.
I think there's plenty of incentive around keeping our costs down.
But spread it across the district, Rob.
Well, there still is incentive.
Well, we've lost control. It's obvious now.
We're working within an inflationary environment where the costs are going up.
Those are excuses.
Any other questions from the floor? Councillor Fraser?
Just wondering, what's the annual rate of inflation this year?
I believe something like 6.88% for urban and something like 22% for rural behind the farm gate.
So we're fairly close to expecting inflation, really, aren't we?
So just in terms of that additional information, in terms of that that we requested in terms of the proportion of properties that there are in these different, it's not population, it's number of properties, I don't know how many people live in them. So in the 23-24 year, 51% of our 19,047 rating units are residential, and then 18% is lifestyle, and then the next biggest is farming at 17%. So if we looked at that same split of the urbans and the rurals that I talked about before, 77% of the properties are in the urban sector and 23% are in the rural sector.
So we are saying 23% are paying about half of the rates.
Yeah, and so that's because like we're limited under the Local Government Act to collect 30% of our rates using a fixed charge, excluding the service charges. So, and the reason for that is that the government or the legislation recognises that fixed charges are actually, remember we talked about regressive, they don't move with incomes, and as the Smithers pointed out, the only ability that council has to, the only tool that council has to reflect ability to pay is through either capital value or land value or improvement value as a rating tool. So this council uses capital value as its proxy for that. And that's why we will always have to charge a portion of our rates on capital value because we're limited under the legislation to only collect 30% of certain rates through fixed charges. And what a fixed charge does is it pushes rates towards the sectors that have got multiple properties, and that can be low value properties, and it can be vacant sections, because they'll be paying the same amount as a big farm. Or a property with a big house. If it's vacant or low value, it pays the same. And I think we looked at some of those examples in some of those towns that around how the fixed charge works. So that's what it does. And so council through its policy making process felt that the mix of value that we had, getting to sort of a 50-50 share overall, was sort of moved from there since then because the water rates have gone up and the capital value of the residential sector's gone up. But generally they were happy with that, where we got in terms of balance. And like I've said, that's something for council to talk about. But.
And I think just reflecting on that, when you look at that Future for Local Government report that was released yesterday, one of their strong recommendations is around the funding, and noting something I read the other day with once the Free Waters leave under the Free Waters reform, 95% of the funding comes from taxation, and we've got 5% of the funding to do the amount of work that we do, and that's actually where the crux of it actually lies. The amount of work that we are being required to do, even under legislation, is getting bigger and bigger, but the funding isn't coming to match, which is putting the pressure on the ratepayers. So there is a modal shift required here for us to be able to perform our roles properly as well. But yeah, it's reading this annual plan was a real eye-opener for me again, that the amount of work that we actually have to do with the limited amount of funding that we've got, especially around the infrastructure. We don't have any fancy stadiums or anything like that. We're actually focusing on delivering that core infrastructure in the roads and the bridges, and we've had some pretty strong discussions around those lately too. So it's a tough gig for us, and this long-term plan that we're going through at the moment is going to be a very difficult one to get through, to get that balance on how we achieve what we need to achieve with the funding that we've got. But I think that extra information that you provided today has been really useful, and I think for those submitters, hopefully they're watching or can watch us afterwards to get a better understanding of what that's involved. So thank you for bringing that along. I thought that was quite useful. Councillor Byers?
Question, thank you. While you've got that open, how many rating units are there in Winton?
I don't have it broken down to that. I've only got it at the land use level.
Population of about 2,000, councillor, but the rating units will be less than that.
I can come back on that, yeah.
Through your worship, I mean, from a long-term perspective, regardless of how many rateable units, I've noticed in the long-term plan that the projections for the likes, Winton seems to be a hot topic at the moment, okay? So does Te Anau. I think from memory it was projected that between now and 2042, something like 400 to 500 extra households will be in those areas. So ultimately what you're talking about is that long-term approach in terms of how we distribute those funds and those rates accordingly. I don't know if I can see any major shift in the change in infrastructure away from those two particular areas in Southland. Is there any evidence to support otherwise? I'm trying to understand where the rationale is coming from in terms of that distribution of rating. I understand why it happens based on a population basis. So yeah, I think Tayana in particular is going to be a place of immense growth, and I fully support any kind of infrastructure that with regards to its wastewater in particular, or its that particular area. So I don't know.
Probably long-term plan, again, discussion in relation to it's I mean, that's, yeah. Did you want to?
No, I'm
Just
not
as a general
entirely,
comment.
So the activity management planning process and the LTP planning process is where you should be looking at the future and what the future of Southland looks like and where infrastructure might be, and then you use that information. So the funding bit comes last, really. You then look at that and then you decide how you might fund that investment that you might need to make into those places. And so that's where the policy allows us to think about how we might use different tools to fund that infrastructure through borrowing or through selling assets, or it could be through development contributions, and then also how we're going to rate, how we think we're going to rate that and what we think is appropriate. So there is some controls in the legislation about funding growth and things you can and can't do when we're talking about Te Anau, if that's the aspect that you're talking about where we might need to build new infrastructure. But the key thing is, as you go through the asset planning process, is to understand where the infrastructure, where staff are saying we need to build infrastructure in the next 10 years or in the next 30 years, and how we're going to fund that is then the flip side to that. Yeah. Hopefully that provides some context.
So we've got our recommendations on page. Sorry, Councillor Chamberlain.
I'm just wondering, why aren't we as a council advocating more to central government about requiring more funding? I think perhaps the ratepayers might stomach it better if they knew that the council was fighting for them. I mean,
we are.
I know, but people don't see that. I mean, and even us as councils probably don't see it. I mean, obviously you're talking to them, but...
Well, there was a submission for the future for local government. We did a submission on that, but we are continually advocating, and the sector is as well. And as this final report comes out from the future for local government, there is a big section in there on it. So yeah, the application is happening quite strongly. It's like a good partnership, you require both parties to apply.
I can only endorse what Rob's saying, and having a look through the document you sent to us yesterday afternoon, that there is a strong emphasis in there that rating should be coming from central.
I'm not arguing that.
And there is the pressure going on to push for that.
I'd be asking the bigger question if that legislation goes through for a refund of GST from the Crown of $1 billion. What proportion of that will go to Southland? That's the question I'd be asking right now.
It's like eroding stuff, I just think as a council we just need to be pushing harder and be seen to be pushing harder.
I can assure you that we are pushing with all the strength that we've got around there, and a lot of it, like with eroding in particular, there's a policy and a formula they're using based on deprivation, a deprivation index that we're getting kind of weighted on. So, and it's looking at getting those policies actually changed to be more effective. So yeah, I can assure you that the advocacy is happening. Is it getting anywhere? Time will tell, but it's not for want of trying.
But I don't think the public are seeing that, and they've just been forced to stomach up with another 7-point-something rate increase and not seeing a lot for it.
But I guess you could look at it from the other hand and say if the advocacy wasn't happening, then they might be getting a lot more rates increased, because we are actually getting somewhere with that too. So yeah, it's, we're doing our job as best as we can to get that through. Councillor Wilson.
Just want to touch on the kind of deprivation index, and I'm wondering if there's any context around. There's been quite a big increase in value on land values and capital values since that more recent climb in value. Has there been any increase in ratepayers going into payment plans or defaulting on rates or arrears on rates? Has there been any increase in that may suggest affordability affected by that capital value increase?
Everyone's looked over to Shelley and Is that a question you can answer now, Shelley, or is that something that we can, that'll form part of the, I sound like a broken record to say long-term plan, but I mean, the annual plan and the long-term plan are so related, but a lot of the discussion today actually reflects the current discussion that we're having around the long-term plan, so that information will be available to us as we go through that.
and through you, Rob, that information will become very much after the rates demand goes out, with the increase on it in relation to new valuations and things on Stewart Island and things like that.
And again,
a
there's
much more
also
accurate figure.
There's also advocacy going on from the sector about increasing that threshold for being able to get the rates relief from central government as well. And getting that awareness out there is so important around that.
It's very hard to put capital value and land value as reflection of income. It's, unless you bought the house yesterday or the property yesterday, it's not a reflection.
There's no perfect fair measure across everybody for rates, and that's the one thing that stood out to me with my whole time on council is, and I think it's Nicole's words, it's a very blunt instrument of how we can charge, but our role is to try and get it as equitable as possible across our audience.
And do remember that, sorry, there is another graph that's in your presentation. Capital value is about half of our rates, is it? I think so we're charging 46% of our rates based on capital value and 54% on fixed. And remember I said there's a maximum of 30, but that excludes service rates. So that's why it appears to be more than 30. So we're not, we're using it to collect around half of our rates.
I know the photographer's taking photos and we're all very pensive around a very interesting subject. Maybe we need to get the photos taken when we're handing out grants or something. So we've got the recommendations on page 22, and I'll go through them with the importance of this item one by one. So A through to D are our standard ones. E confirms the, sorry?
Well, A to C are the standard.
A to C,
D's
sorry.
a specific one.
So in D, we're confirming with Section 100 of the Local Government Act that it's financially prudent for council to predict an operating deficit in the 2023-24 annual plan. So that's around depreciation. That'll be revisited as part of the assumptions for the 24-34 long-term plan. E confirms that the rating boundary changes for the Mosman Hall, Northern Pool, Tutorau Hall, Mokareta Reedon Hall, Winden Hall, Upper Hall and Nightcaps Hall rates in attachment A. And then F, that we're adopting the forecasting assumptions, the price level changes with the bill inflation, the cost estimates, a climate change level of uncertainty from moderate to high, and the risk if the assumption was incorrect from medium to high, infrastructure asset revaluation, using bill inflation, taking into account planned additions, funding the replacement of future assets. Depreciation will be funded on significant assets as follows: council buildings, IT, wheelie bins, public toilets and solid waste at 90, water and waste 45, roading 75, motor vehicles and CS are at 100. And then we're adopting the annual plan attachment A, including the funding impact statement for the 23-24 financial year with the amendments to the fees and charges schedule to apply from 1st of July 23. And adopting the 23-24 financial statements and associated rate changes, analysis by township and land use sector in attachment B. And we're also delegating authority to the Chief Executive to approve any final edits required to the annual plan in order to finalise the document for distribution. So is there someone in a position to move all of those? Councillor Duffy, do we have a seconder? Councillor Keast. Is there any further discussion on any of those? Councillor Byles?
If it doesn't go through today, what's the process?
Then we are unable to set our rates, so it becomes extremely difficult to operate.
So there must be a time limit to serve before.
Well, we need to get the rates set by the 1st of July.
You technically have to adopt your plan by the 30th of June. So we are under legislation. We should be adopting on 30th of June. We can set our rates. Is there a time limit between the period of time between? So we have a separate resolution today and a separate report about rates resolution, and that has to be done in a certain time frame. You can do that any time, but it has to be aligned with what your annual plan is. So the rates that are set in the annual plan rates biz must be the same as what's in the annual plan document. So essentially you pretty much have to do them on the same day.
Cool. If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion, and all in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Councillor Chamberlain, which I've noted. I'll declare that motion carried, and thank you to the team. It's been a very lengthy process and very good discussion all the way through. Now might be an opportune time to break for morning tea.
You want the rights resolution?
Your Worship, councillors. Through your Worship. So this report is the one where we set the rates for the 2023 year. It's a requirement of the Local Rating Government Act that we set the rates, we set the payment dates, and we set what penalties we may do as the Act provides. So you've just approved the rates as per the annual plan, but this is a separate resolution, and those numbers mirror 100% the plan to this recommendation. And we are proposing to collect the rates in 4 instalments, the collection dates being the last working Friday of the middle month they are due, so July, August, September. We get the payment date for the August, for the 3 months that the instalment covers, all the way through the year. Very consistent with Invercargill City and ES collect in 1 instalment, but they aim for a 2nd instalment, so it's quite good that in Southland we look to collect on the same dates, share of advertising and stuff. And we are looking to put the same penalties we've had in the past, so a 10% penalty on each instalment and a 10% on the total on the 1st of July. And there are actually 3 penalties that the Local Government Rating Act that we can apply, but we've just gone with the 2 as we have in the past. We've also recommended to not collect rates under $10 for economical purposes, and they're usually a contiguous land property, so you own multiple, and this one's just got a couple of little land value ones that are under $10. So there's a recommendation in here that we don't collect it. They still do get a letter, so they're aware of it, and if rates ever go up over it, they will get rated over $10. Any questions?
Just looking at the recommendation, I think we've got the shortest day, but that's probably the longest recommendation. Pages of them, but yeah, do we have any questions? I don't think I'll read out this recommendation like I did the last one. Councillor Wilson, you?
I do have one real quick question, and it might have maybe been the last item, but it still reflects the one of the stormwater targeted rates. I did just want to ask the question of what determines a stormwater system to be targeted, like what areas that are targeted for stormwater, what infrastructure do they actually have? Is it purely reticulated?
My belief is stormwater is an open trench is counted as stormwater, but Nicole's
Defined areas when we did the 2021.
Sorry, come up, Nicole.
We defined the areas when we did the 2021 LTP, and that was generally looking around where it's not necessarily reticulated. It can be open ditches, it can be reticulation, but it was generally the urban area where those sorts of things are provided. We didn't draw the line exactly where they're provided. We then aligned that with what's called the district plan urban areas or rural settlement areas, and we use those because those also define where we've said we're quite happy for more intensive development to occur, and so we identified the areas that had stormwater plus those, and we use those areas to draw those boundaries. And those boundaries are largely consistent with community board urban areas and community board semi-urban areas. So we're trying to have a lot of consistency and not have a lot of different boundaries for things. So if you had stormwater in some way, shape or form in your town, generally in different parts of your town or area, and it could be ditches or reticulation, then you would be defined as being an area with stormwater, and then that geographical area we would see would be similar to what we were using for the community board or for the district plan boundaries, unless it was wildly different, unless there was only half of the town that had it and the other half didn't. But most of the time there's stormwater, parts of a stormwater network.
The targeted rates still then go to district.
So the targeted rate works that we've got defined stormwater for the sake of it, we'll call it serviced areas, these urban areas, and they pay a full charge. And then everybody else in the district pays a quarter charge, which is a contribution towards stormwater as well, because they travel into town, and that's the sort of so it's on a district basis because everybody's paying, but there's a differential between what people are paying. If you're in the service area, you're paying a full charge. If you're outside of that, you're paying a quarter charge.
Is it fair to say that in the 3 waters, waste, drinking and stormwater. Stormwater's got the most variance in terms of what the level of service is or what the actual infrastructure is, and potentially that's something that we should be looking into in the LTP, just as far as those targeted rates.
So part of the issue around stormwater is it's historical asset information and data, and knowing exactly we've got where and what it looks like, and also the nature of stormwater isn't like water and sewage where your property is connected. It can be about catchments and taking water away. So it's more like a general benefit as opposed to an individual benefit. My property is connected. It's just generally when stormwater is dealt with well in my area, I'm having a benefit because I'm not getting that inundation. So it's actually, when we think about that benefits, thinking that we're talking about when we do the revenue and financing policy, there's more of a general public benefit to stormwater than there is to what I would consider water and storage and water and wastewater, because it's not about necessarily just connection of my house. It's actually trying to take rainfall away from this urban area to stop inundation. So it's sort of quite different than water and wastewater.
Yeah, I guess the nuances being that in some urban areas, the stormwater taking the water away is natural creeks. So to be targeted for stormwater because you've got natural creeks taking water away is a hard one to understand. But that's again, I guess, an LTP conversation to look at.
Yeah. I mean, just one thing to comment, like, it's really difficult sometimes to have exact benefit definition, because we can employ a whole lot of staff to define that and where the water's going, but the cost of doing that, is quite considerable to actually have that perfectly designed. So what we've got is a fit for purpose system based on the information that we know about the asset and general concepts of benefit and overall allocation of liability. So there's a whole lot of factors going in there. It's not, I'm essentially saying there's a lot of cost in getting better data and analysis and understanding that. And so that's something that the council balances on.
We're getting a better view of those assets, though, as in the Three Waters changes, those assets are getting tidied up and the IA the list of everything that's available. So I guess
I think as time goes on as well, the data is going to improve and we're going to get to I guess slightly deviating from the report, but still useful discussion, I think. So if there's no further questions on it, I'll from the chair, I'll put the motion recommendations. I'll move the recommendation. I'm struggling here. Start again. From the chair, I'll move the recommendations A through to K. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fraser. Is there any further discussion on any of those motions that anyone wants to raise? There being none, I will put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried, and we have our rates for the next financial year set. Thank you very much. And one Nicole staying there. I'm just moving my way through all of these A through K. And 7.3, review of the debt recovery policy, which is page 291 of your agenda, with recommendations on 292. And I'll hand that to you, Nicole.
So at Financial Assurance last meeting, we went through this policy here. It's really about talking around how council wants us to deal with recovering debt that's owed to us, either through rates, through CASA electricity tariffs, or through other sundry debt that we've got for other fees that we charge, like regulatory fees. So staff have done a review of that policy, and generally we found it quite fit for purpose, but the one thing we have proposed to take out of the policy is the financial delegations to staff and officers, and because they're already contained in the financial delegations policy, which council approved last year, and we don't want there to be any difference between the two, so we don't want any confusion. Finance and Assurance at its meeting did ask some questions around ensuring that makes it clear who's responsible for the policy, and so we've added some additional information on page 307 under section 9 that states that the Chief Financial Officer is responsible for ensuring that the policy is applied correctly and within the approved delegations. So that was a change that came from the Finance and Assurance Committee and based on the feedback that they gave. So I'll really just open up for questions. Shelley actually does all of the logistical application of the debt recovery policy, so if you have any technical questions, Shelley.
Do we have any questions? like, yeah, we had good discussion in finance insurance a couple of weeks ago, so it looks like we're all pretty comfortable with this. Is there someone willing to move that recommendation? Councillor Ravenclaw, seconded by Councillor Menzies. Any further discussion on that? I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so we now move to the risk management annual review, which is on page 317 of your agenda, and I'll invite Jane up to the table to introduce this item.
Good morning, Your Worship. Good morning, councillors. So the purpose of this report is to seek adoption of Council's priority strategic risks in each reporting year. So these risks were subject to annual review by the leadership team, and they were presented to and endorsed by the Finance and Insurance Committee when it met earlier this month. So the proposed risks are included with the report, and if adopted, are intended to become operational from 1 July. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jane. Once again, something we discussed a couple of weeks ago, so there might not be any questions. Looking around the room, Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jane. We've talked a wee bit this morning about the rates, affordability around about maxed out. Ratepayers are paying about all they can afford, and yet we've just adopted some rates increases, and if they were to continue redoubling the rates over the next 10 years, is that a risk? Is there a risk there for this organisation that could potentially affect its financial or its ability to operate longer term?
Your Worship, I don't feel particularly qualified to speak to that. It's financial aspect is something we always consider within our risk management. I don't know if LT or someone to add to that.
So in obviously the decision making that's happened at the table this morning, I'm sure that people have taken into consideration, what is possible for the community to be able to afford, and we also have the opportunity for those in a policy there for those that actually are struggling to be able to afford rates, to be able to fund those. And through that process, they can come into the finance team and through communication, they can look at a remission as well. So I think there are, at this point in time, there are mechanisms in place to assist with the risk around that. But, it's the long-term plan will be another discussion and what comes at that point. So obviously this, good discussion today about, what's the level at which the ratepayers can afford. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Any further questions? There being none, is someone in a position to move the recommendations A through to D on page 318? Councillor Keast, Councillor Duffy. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion to the table. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Brad. Okay. Racing right through, we're up to 7.5, draft dangerous affected in the sanitary buildings policy consultation. So this is on page 323 of your agenda, and Dana's still here.
Thank you. So this report seeks council endorsement to go up for consultation on the draft dangerous affected in sanitary buildings policy, which has been presented with the report. So this policy is council's regulatory tool to manage buildings in the district which could pose health and safety risks to the community. So under statutory timeframes, we're required to review our existing policy within a 5-year timeframe, and that review has been undertaken and ensures that the draft policy presented fulfils council's responsibilities under the Building Act. So amendments to the draft have only been minor style and structure changes to ensure that the policy remains fit for purpose and easy for both the community and members of staff to use. So we're now looking to consult on the draft policy as part of the policy suite which we discussed with you weeks ago. So staff are recommending today that council endorses the draft that's presented, and we will go out with it in accordance with the special consultative procedure from mid-July through to mid-August this year before it will come back to council to deliberate. So thank you. Ellie and I are here to answer any questions you might have regarding the draft.
Cool. Thank you, Jane. Councillor O'Brien.
Through you, Your Worship, what does a specialist consultative process looks like? I mean, when you talk about, whether a building is fit for purpose or not, what do you mean by a specialist?
The special consultative procedure that we go out under, it's a requirement under the LGA. It means that if it's of particular interest to the community, we have additional measures that we will put in place to make sure that we're informing those people who are concerned. We go out by as many avenues as possible. It's just it's a stage higher than it is probably the most.
Formalised version of consultation. And then there's a submission process and a hearing process attached with it.
So the actual assessment process is not a specialised form. We go through our normal BCO.
This is a consultation procedure that we use for many of our policies. It will just depend on the significance of the subject matter we're going out with. So for this policy in particular, because it's a requirement under the Building Act, it's something that we do go out and make sure that the community are aware that we're consulting on it.
So would that mean, do we use Make It Stick or something else?
Yes.
Going up there?
So through you, we're using as many avenues many tools as we've got available to us. So I think you'll see in the statement of proposal, we'll be looking at going out via the newspapers. We'll also be using council's Facebook pages, Make It Stick. We'll be sort of promoting this consultation as widely as we can, and the public will have as many opportunities as possible to be able to submit.
Councillor Duffy, did you?
Oh, well, I didn't, but I might actually. Just regarding the building owners prevent buildings remaining dangerous or unsanitary, just a question regarding not so much the buildings but the surroundings of them in terms of being a fire hazard. And I think we did have some teeth about this years ago that we sort of don't now. And that's sort of taken out of our hands, is it?
Yes, through your worship. Yes, FINS now cover that for us. Council doesn't have that. We don't have the teeth now available to us that we potentially did. FINS has taken that obligation from council. It certainly sits outside the scope of what this policy is addressing.
Any further questions, Councillor Wilson?
That's right. Paragraph 24, it's just mentioning Invercargill, Queenstown and Gore councils, and that this policy will be quite closely aligned. Do you know when those other councils would have gone through this consultation process to get to their policies?
Through your worship, I can't speak to the dates. I know Queenstown Lakes, which is one we've certainly looked at, has been quite a recent. Most of these will have been done in the last couple of years, so they're all since the legislation changed since 2018, so they're all fairly recent policies, and we've tried to align them to this consistency across the region.
Is that the approach going forward, to have fairly aligned policies, and if it's in reflection to legislation change, would it be prudent to work together as councils to align policies and consult together?
I guess the timing of when the bylaws are coming up for renewal is the one challenge around that, where they're all done at different times. Ours will be coming up now, theirs could be coming up in 3 years' time.
So similar to the subdivision match up, then there's obviously some shared costs. Just the consultation will have a cost to it, and the hearing process will have a cost to it, no doubt.
Through you, Your Worship. Absolutely, as much as possible to work within and with our neighbouring within the region, and potentially broader than that if it makes sense, if the policy makes sense to cross into other areas. That will be only able to be done if everybody wants to also participate in that. But definitely Southland District Council is keen to continue a collaborative approach with our neighbouring councils to do that as much as possible. It makes it easier for the community in terms of understanding the bylaws, and also it assists with, potentially sometimes somebody else can take the lead on it, and we can, so in terms of resource-wise, it can actually be of benefit as well. Occasionally, though, there might be very good reasons why there's a difference for, Invercargill City versus something that might be relevant for Southland District. So there is that need to think about that as well, because that might make it even less efficient. So we need to be cautious on which ones we do that with.
question in the recommendations on G where you mentioned before that you're going to do Facebook, but it's only mentioning the newspaper advertisements in Southland Express, Southland Times and Sturt Island News. Do we need to be more, is there an appetite in the room to be more specific around Facebook and other as well in the recommendation? Or
Very good question. We can certainly add that as an extra. It's outlined in the statement of proposal all revenues will be using. In terms of the recommendations, this is certainly what's required of us through the SCP. If you wish that to be an additional, we're certainly covering all bases.
No, there's never an issue to do additional.
That's right.
In terms of communication, so either way, we're comfortable both ways with that.
I would recommend not being absolutely specific in the recommendation because that gives us the freedom to do a whole as many things as we can.
so do we say what placing at least, or saying
at least,
sizing in that motion that's the minimum that we're going to do, and other avenues as well?
Good idea, thank you.
Well, I guess through you, Your Worship, you're specifically talking about print media, aren't you? In that first one, placing newspaper advertisement in the south, you're actually saying which print media is. What if you just said in print media?
What were your thoughts on looking at the weeds for that one?
I think, does it say the Express in the inside?
We've quoted the Southland Express, the Southland Times and the Sturt Island News as being...
I would just use print media then.
Well, in print media, and do we say and online and any other applicable sources or something like that to keep it open? So that would cover digital media. Yeah, and that would cover
Applicable digital media,
Print and digital media.
Or community boards.
Yeah, I was just going to say community boards as well. So that yeah, keep it broad. I think is the key. So
Town cries.
digital media.
Round table at the pub.
discussion on that, or I'll move that recommendation from the chair A through to G with the amendment that Fiona is just drafting up now. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Beauperoy.
Placing advertisements in print media, online, the applicable sources in digital media, does that?
And if we say, where are we? Regs to consider publicising the statement of proposal, utilising print, online and any other applicable
Town crier and political forum.
Councillor O'Brien's nominating himself to be the town crier.
Be inundated with people.
Online, digital media and other.
Avenue.
Got the cape in here.
So do we have a second for that? Councillor Rancourt,
Councillor Beauperoy and Councillor Rancourt.
I'll put that motion on the table. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along to 7.6, the Ojai Community Housing Re-roofing Retrospective Unbudgeted Expenditure on page 347, and Mark Day and Lance. Welcome. This is Lance's first time at the council meeting, so
Through your worship, good morning everyone. I'm here to talk about two retrospective and budgeted expenditure reports. The first one being the Ojai Community Housing Re-roofing Project. I will take this report as read and we'll just quickly summarise the main points. The 5 Ojai housing units were down for a re-roof this year. We put a tender out to 3 council-approved contractors and only received 1 tender price back. A local contractor was awarded the job. The contract price came in just under $10,000 over the budget estimate. The contract included some additional work required to bring the housing units up to compliance with the Healthy Home standards, and also some structural requirements such as pooling upgrades, which was not initially scoped. The increase in the budget is also a result of the building and economic climate, which has seen significant increases in the building materials and supplies. We'd like to fund the shortfall using some of the housing reserve funds, and this requires council approval. So happy to take any questions.
It's a question for me, and it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, I guess, but just the timing of this becoming a retrospective unbudgeted expenditure, is that just due to the nature of how the project unfolded? Because ideally it'd be nice to have it prior to the work being done, but I assume that that was outside of your control.
Yeah, with only receiving the one price, coming back in from the tenders, it was due to the scope of some extra work in the roof with the backs, insulation and things, and so that just bumped up the price a little bit to it. The budget was set in the last LTP, so.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions from the floor?
Oh, yeah, through you, Your Worship. Are the houses currently tenanted, and if so, how long have we got a tenancy for?
Yes, they are. We do have some vacant units, and the length of time that they are tenanted for varies on the tenant. We have some very long-term tenants, which makes it sometimes difficult to do maintenance on the properties. But what we generally budget on having 50 of having them tenanted for 50 weeks out of the 52 weeks of the year. But as I say, if we're doing major work like this, we quite often wait until there is no tenant in the building.
Any further questions? There being none, is there someone in a position to move recommendations A through to D? Councillor Menzies, Councillor Rattencourt. I'll put that motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. And I believe we've got a very similar one up next, 7.7, Riverton Community Housing, Healthy Homes Compliance, Heat Pumps and Ventilation Retrospective Unbudgeted Expenditure on page 351. Over to you again, Lance.
Thank you. So through your worship again. So the second retrospective unbudgeted expenditure report is in the Riverton Community Housing, Healthy Homes Compliance. I take the report as being read, but can quickly summarise the main points. As part of the government's Healthy Homes policy, all rental properties need to be compliant by July 2024. We have approached this standard trying to spread the costs of this over several years. This year we're going to have a $12,939 operational budget left over, and it was decided to upgrade the units at Riverton. Being a capital item, this needs approval from council to use the operational money for a capital project. The units at Riverton are now all fully compliant. And is there any questions on the Councillor Menzies?
Thank you, Worship. Just a question around how many of our homes still require to be upgraded to the level of the July 2024 regulations?
I don't have that information. I will get it to you after the meeting if that's okay. Yep.
So I presume from that they're all budgeted to have occurred by July 2024.
That is correct. We've got money in next year's budget to bring the last of the units up to standard. I do have the information, but I just don't put on.
That's all right, but there's a further risk that more might come in as unbudgeted expenditure.
We will manage the budget so they don't.
Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. A question around and it relates to reports that you've presented today. One is coming from the reserves and the other's coming from the operating surplus. I presume that probably this one was up first, so it grabbed the money from the operating surplus, and the other one was from reserves because of no operating budget left.
That's correct.
Any further questions? Councillor Wilson?
Just trying to understand the difference. So the previous report, the job went out to tender, and one came back in. This one here didn't go to tender, but just a quote to one contractor. Is this what's the difference between the projects of why one would be tendered and one would just be seeking a quote from one contractor?
Because of the value of
there's a threshold of that. Okay. Is there potentially other contractors locally who can do that?
In terms of Riverton, we don't have any more than one contractor out there, and under our procurement process, we can just engage with a single contractor. With this type of work, those local contractors know the units. So it's easy to go to the local contractor.
Yeah.
Councillor O'Brien?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Just so it's clear in my mind, the quote for $11,226 to install 7 heat pumps for 4 ventilation and extraction units. Do the 3 points of the heating standards, the insulation standards, and the deliver to the scope of work, is all of that included in that 11,000, or is it just for the units and the ventilation?
No, it's your heat pumps, and then we're required to put an extractor fan in the kitchen and in the bathroom.
So in terms of meeting the standards for walls and ceilings and underfloor...
They've previously been done.
Oh, they've been... Okay.
Yeah. So those projects have previously been completed.
Okay.
So these are the things that we have to do to the units to get them up to
that standard. Yeah, no,
that's what's the last bit of the work to sign those ones off.
Yeah.
When the units don't have a ceilings cavity, they're basically pitched roof. So when we do the roof, we put the insulation in, because most of them don't have insulation in the roof.
Right.
So hence the reason why we go through the process of re-roofing them. Most of them were built in the 1970s. They've got dechromatic tiles. So we've been progressively going through upgrading the roofs from dechromatic tiles to long run iron.
So all of that's been done?
Not all of the units,
Riverton units.
but all the Riverton units have been done.
Okay, all right.
And Councillor Menzies' question will address the ones that haven't.
Yeah. So we have a program in place to get the rest of them done this coming year.
If there's no further discussion, is there someone willing to move that recommendation? Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Duffy. I'll put that motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we now have an unbudgeted expenditure report for the Ojai Railway Fund, March 2023 funding round.
Yep. Good morning, everybody.
Page 355, sorry.
This report is to seek approval for budgeted expenditure for the Ojai Railway Fund. So for this financial year, the committee have allocated grants totalling $101,935. Because the budget is only $55,000 for the financial year, this requires budget expenditure of $46,735. So $16,079 of that is to come from the interest and $30,656 to come from the reserve. So happy to answer any questions on that.
And I can just comment on that from being present at that meeting that it was certainly endorsed and supported by the committee, and we're essentially administering the fund on behalf of them. So Councillor Chamberlain.
I was at the meeting. Can you confirm whether the medical centre applied for the extra 10,000 and did they receive it?
I don't know about that yet. I have been in contact with them a couple of times.
In here yet?
Yeah, so no, the 10,000 not included yet. They haven't got back to me about whether they got.
So what happens there if they don't get that community funding? Do they come back?
I think they will either pay for that themselves or they will come back. They haven't indicated to me what they're doing either way.
I assume they said if they couldn't get that funding, they could come back to the railway.
So
will that be another motion we'll have to pass later on if they come back?
That's included in this total though, if they need that 10,000, that's included in this.
If they don't take it, they'll just go back to the full. Any further questions? Happy to move that recommendation, Councillor Chamberlain. Do we have a seconder? Right. I'll put that motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you. And I believe you're still here for the next one, which is the Sport New Zealand Rural Travel Application expenditure on page 365.
This one is slightly less. So unfortunately, in the last round of the Rural Travel Fund, one of the applications was missed. So that was from Northern Southland College. They're entitled to $1,400 from the fund. So because it's pretty much depleted, because it was the last round of the financial year, it's proposed that The funding comes from the Spark Reserve, $344. So the Spark Reserve, that's just the old name of Sport NZ, and the District Operations Reserve for the remaining $1,066.
Yeah, are there any questions?
Yeah, just what's the actual grant for? What was the actual?
So the rural travel fund. So
yeah,
that's
but what were Northern Southland College applying for the funding for?
for travel to attend.
It was for travel.
Yeah.
Councillor Keast?
Thank you, Worship. Just as a background, have we changed our processes to make sure that these don't get missed in the future?
I think it's just a human error on my part. What happened is I received 2 emails from different people at Northern Southland College, and the attachment looked the same initially, but it obviously wasn't the same. So.
Doesn't look like. Oh, sorry, Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Is there an opportunity for that amount to be repaid out of next year's funding to the reserve fund?
Potentially, I would say, if that is what council want to do. To check with finance, yep, we could do that.
Given we've got some reserves this time around, we may have some next time, which means it's coming out of that package rather than the reserves.
So with that in mind, do we want to put an E in there to say that with the next funding, if there's a surplus to repay that reserve?
New E?
Just put an E at the end, I think. Put any surplus from the next round, into reserve.
Yeah.
To the amount that was taken out for the
District Operations Reserve.
But it won't be the full 1,400, will it? It'll be the difference between what came out of the Spark Reserve and... So is someone in a position to answer Councillor O'Brien?
Sorry, through you, Worship, just a question. I'm assuming, based on the fact that we're looking at, probably ongoing funding, for this, has there been any research done into sort of a cost-benefit analysis of seeing how many people are travelling and how many vehicles and how far they're going? So I guess what I'm saying is there room for clubs and schools through the funding to apply for things like, a minivan or such?
They already do that, depending on the setup. So a lot of the schools will do that, and they will just put the money towards that, and then they can just take a whole load of kids into Friday night basketball or, whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah. It'll just depend on the club or the school.
And geography and...
Yeah, I know a lot of the Tiana clubs will do that as well. They'll have a van and they'll just bring a whole load of kids to rugby or...
It's very handy having this funding given the geographic disbursement of some of these sporting activities. I know that a lot of Ks are done across the district. Fiona's just about got the new E up there for us. Is there someone in a position to move those? Councillor Ruddenclaw, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That is carried. Right, we have now 7.10, which is a Milford Community Trust Statement of Intent 23 to 26. Simon Moran, and welcome back. I nearly said Councillor Abel Kramer to the... It's been a while since you've been sitting around this table, Abel.
It's been a while, yeah. Afternoon, councillors, Your Worship.
Page 369.
I took it off. Thank you for that. The first one being the statement of intent. Take the report as read. As you can see, it is very much the report that you get each time that we present the statement of intent. And largely because, as we've talked about previously, the activities of the trust at this stage, because of the ongoing effects of COVID and the economic impacts on the operators themselves, there's limited amount of activity being undertaken. So happy to answer any questions.
Did Richie, you want to make a
Oh, no, as Simon has pointed out, it's the statement of intent is a process that's there's nothing major in that particular document. So thank you, Your Worship. Happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions from the floor, Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. How's the tourism numbers going in there now?
They're starting to climb up again. I mean, it's been difficult since February 2020, and it's just starting to come back up again. It's nowhere near pre-COVID, of course, as you'll know, Council. So it's just a matter of as the borders open, so like China has just only recently opened up their borders, so that provides an opportunity for that tourism to come back to New Zealand. And there are some numbers coming from them, but it's slow, very slow. It'll take time.
Councillor Menzies.
Just with respect, the main focus of the work you're doing seems to be around the recreation centre, and it's got its own issues. But just thinking about other strategic improvements for this community, which is very small, do you think there's going to be, or what do you think might be the other opportunities ahead that might widen the scope of your focus?
Well, I suppose there are various options. For example, we've recently opened up a walking track between the village itself and Milford Sound, basically for safety reasons. And we're also trying to figure out what other initiative we can discuss with the community. We've got a tennis court there, and we're now talking to the community as to what other activities we might be able to generate for that particular community.
Have iwi come up with any kind of suggestions about what?
Not at this stage, no.
Through Your Worship. See, I had a meeting earlier this week which revolved around the financial viability around a shared use cycle walking asset between Te Anau Downs and Cascade Creek. That's a process which is basically going to produce a report in the next 6 weeks or so. Now, one of the questions that this particular person asked me was, can you comment on the general feeling from the community about a proposal to have, up to 160 kilometres of this style of asset being incorporated into this area? A, have you been consulted on this? And B, do you have any kind of feedback in terms of the community sentiment around this?
Well, there's two aspects there. One is that the area between Te Anau Downs and Cascade Creek is really outside of the scope of the Milford Community Trust. We study from that area itself. If you're talking about a wider community, which is the Charney Fielden area, the nature of that is very much supported, greatly supported. But it's got its challenges with the particular government departments to be able to achieve that.
And certainly through Milford Opportunities, which is where that project lies. Talking with operators, and there was a meeting with, I don't know, what did we have there, 10, 12 people. I think the feedback is on the Milford Opportunities website from that particular meeting, and generally that walking and cycling activity was well supported by the wider groups that they represented.
And it was a fairly diverse representation of that sort of 20 or so people throughout. Would that be fair to say, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, you had fish and game, two, I guess, wearing two hats. One is his previous as a policeman and traffic, and the other is fish and game. So you had sort of that recreational hunting side of things, and then you had tramping club members, you had some operators there as well around things that their clients could do if this was in place. So, yes.
One of the things that I think you alluded to before in terms of some legislative restrictions, is DOC there by chance with regards to their sort of, their long-term plans in terms of their 15-year, it's taken 15 years for them to kind of get to the point where, you have to get any form of sign-off from them. Is there any kind of comment or appetite from them around this?
We're just starting to deviate slightly off the statement of intent of the
I forgot where I was.
Community Trust. So perhaps we can have that question, unless you want to quickly answer it.
Yeah, in terms of DOC, the two representatives there, I think, what's her name?
Antonia.
No, Embleton Muir.
Oh, yeah.
And Grant Tremaine, both there. So, yeah, DOC were represented at that meeting.
So we've got the recommendation on page 369. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Abel, Simon. I sent through a couple of questions just last night on some clarity on the statement of intent, potential mistake around the date of the trust amendment. It's got in the statement of intent that the trust was amended in 2020. Is that correct, or is it?
Yeah, it is a mistake. It should be in 2021, and the amendments came into being or came into force on the 27th of July 2021.
And what's the process around the amendment of that date to get to that?
So the process around that was the one that's set out in the deed itself, so in that clause 14. So the trust had a meeting, they made a resolution, they had their the requisite time period between being notified of the meeting, and then once they made that resolution, that then got uploaded to the charities charity services website, and then once that was uploaded, it was given effect to at that point. The trust deed itself basically delegates to the trustees the ability to make those amendments to the trust deed.
So was there workshops leading up to those points? So there was workshops around potential changes of the deed, and then formalised meeting adopting those changes?
With the trustees, yes. Yep.
The other question being the two, in the trust structure, there's a couple of trustees with terms ending just at the end of this month. Has there been any indication from those members if they're...
Yeah, I've had informal discussions with all the trustees and to see whether they wish to continue to be on the trust. And they've certainly signalled to me that that's their desire to continue, so which is good. They've got the history to where we're at this stage, and they're pretty keen to see resolutions to some of the projects that we actually work on. So they're keen to stay on.
One of those members was originally a community elected representative. Is that correct? So that component's no longer on the deed, as well as the councillor position on the deed.
That's right.
So were they both changed in that amendment of the deed?
Yes. Yeah, through that process. Yeah.
So one of the issues around the community representative was that through advertising within the community for that representative, a distinct lack of interest over probably the previous two times that we'd gone out looking for one. So Brad had been happy enough to continue, but we had that discussion around, because you can't get any interest, we haven't received any interest from the wider community on that. Is it actually better to just continue to have the fact that any trustee has to be nominated by two members of the community, so you're still having that link back into it, rather than trying to strong arm people into being a community representative?
I guess, the other component was a councillor representative being yourself and also independent chair. So that component was also
discussed
from the deed, and the logic behind that.
To be removed. Well, basically, it's if you've got an independent chair there, and because we're looking at a change in the deed, which the trust was really looking forward to, as I say, that was discussed at the time. It's trying to one step removed from the bureaucratic process. Really, we just like to get ease of business to be able to get that through, and by having a smaller number of trustees, that would actually make the ability to have some real progress on that. I mean, I sat on there on that trust as a councillor and deputy mayor for 8 years, and sometimes I certainly question why was there a need for a councillor on that particular trust. It's that whole community is quite different to any other community within Southland District. Basically, it's a workforce. That's what it is. And the trust has the opportunity to look for the well-being of that community, and that's what its main focus is. So it is slightly different. So it's a different role than a community board rather than with the trust.
One last comment I had was the reason I was confused by the structure of the trust and the previously existing democratic components was that's what's still available on the current statement of intent. So I noted that the last one, the 2 to 24, I think, is still requiring uploading. So when this one gets approved and uploaded, will that last year's statement of intent also be uploaded? Because it hasn't
Yeah,
been
it
done since last
should
week.
have been.
Should have been.
And it was this morning.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that.
Cool. Councillor Keith, sorry for missing you before.
Just touching on really what Matt's been discussing here, or Councillor Wills has been discussing here. So, are there any of the trustees actually resident in Sound?
Brad is, although, residents, they've got property outside of Milford and their homes there, but Brad probably is there 6 weeks at a time, and he's away for a couple of weeks. Roscoe, he's also living in Milford, but also has a home, and so there is. They all have their own private homes in Tiania.
Tony.
Oh yeah, Tony. He actually lives in Milford itself. Steve, he's in and out of Milford all the time. That's right.
I guess the nature of this whole thing kind of reflects the uniqueness of the situation that we've got, where you've got like the chair said, the very unique community that's sort of focused around business rather than a living in community, but has some unique challenges. So it's good that there is something set up to work with.
And also through your worship, it's a transient workforce. It's a transient community, and I think that's something that we have to recognise, that every year there's a significant change in the type of people that work there, all nationalities, all different cultures, and it's really trying to accommodate that at the same time. There's a small group, skeleton group, that really stay there all the time, and the rest is really a transient workforce. So, 1 year you're talking about a particular item, and you follow that through the following year, and there's a different view. So it's really trying to keep your handle on that.
I guess as the tourism gets back up to its previous levels, and with the likes of Milford Opportunity coming in there as well, there's going to be some constant change in the dynamics of how that all is managed.
I mean, pre-COVID, there was just over 300 people living in Milford itself. We haven't got to that number yet, but I would see in time that it will, which will be good. And we're certainly working with, I'm probably digressing a little bit, we're certainly working with MOPS in regards to your earlier question, Councillor Menzies, with regards to the rec facility. So we don't want to be going off one tangent and MOPS going to a different one. So we're working with them at the moment. I'll meet with them on a regular basis so that we can actually work out a decent plan as to how it's all going to work in the future. So we want to be part of that, and the rec facility is part of those discussions.
It's good, especially for the new councillors, to get some context of what's actually going on there. So I appreciate you taking time to come today to support this. So we've got the recommendations there on page 361. I'm happy to move from the... Sorry, Councillor Baber-Roy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for the record, to get some idea, what sort of funds, what sort of quantum of funds does the trust currently have? And what is annual expenses, seeing that one of the reasonings given is to save on $4,400 of audit fees? So what's the total amount?
Yeah, so as of March, what we've got is 452,000 in term deposits. Largely that was is being held for use towards a recreation centre, although there were, previous to COVID, there were some other activities that the Trust was considering investing in there as well. And then in terms of expenses, the expenses this year have been, well, up to date, just over $5,000. There's another $7,000 worth of insurance and audit fees that are coming up, and at the moment the interest on those investments is covering those expenses.
Thank you. That puts into context that the 4,400 seems big. Thank you.
So Councillor Duffy, then Councillor Menzies.
Oh, just a question that's occurred to me. Just given the location and the warnings about AF8, etc., is it the Trust's role to sort of ensure that earthquake preparedness is carried out by the staff living in there?
Yep, I was at a recent meeting with MOPS, which was held in Milford itself, and we had quite a reasonable number of community members there, and there was one item that was discussed for quite some time, and whether the village stays where it is or whether there's different opportunities to build something else, and with regards to the potential earthquake, it was really discussing how we can better safeguard that particular community. How that's done as part of the MOPS program as to how we then fit into that. But it's certainly on MOPS radar, and the Trust is certainly in discussion with them to try and help that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question, you noted, or you talked about your role as a council representative on the Trust earlier, and you found it difficult to see what advantage there was or what the role of the council representative is in there, although you also talked about the well-being of the community, which links in with the community and ourselves. What disadvantages can you see with the councillor no longer being involved in that specific role?
I suppose that it brings bureaucracy to the table. It's a process that we have to follow, and I think that is challenging for the trustees that wish to get on with matters. As I say, the reports had to be generated, taking up council staff time. Every time we want to make a decision, a report had to be formulated, had to be tabled, had to be discussed, and so on and so on. As you know, that's the council process. And I think that becomes rather challenging for a council that says, so, this is the process we've got to follow. That's part of the policies and procedures because you're part of council, and that's just part of it. And they say, well, hang on a minute, do I really want to do that? And it's hard for a council to sit there and bring those people on that journey when it's just so foreign to them. It is foreign to them. And it's difficult to get people to be trustees when you've got a councillor sitting and saying, this is what we need to do. This is the process we need to follow.
So those are the advantages. Were there any disadvantages?
Those are disadvantages.
Well,
as far as
the removal of the council representative on there, if there are anything that were missing due to that change.
So what's your specific question?
There may be none.
Yeah.
Noting that we still have the staff supporting the Trust.
It's been fantastic. Yeah. I mean, the support from council to the Trust has been significant. It's been really, really good. But it's just some of the policies and the processes that you've got to go through. There's always a challenge for each Trust meeting.
I think also one of the things with that is that there is no, apart from the fact that it's a CCO, there's no direct link with any other element of council. There's no reserve in there. It's not stuff being undertaken on council land. It's not, it is national park that then has leases for the operators on it. So it is it's very much, as you touched on before, it's a workers' village, and it's the operators in there, and it's the operators making decisions largely on behalf of, which is, they make up most of the trust. It's the operators making decisions on behalf of their people to benefit them, and the trust in itself is a vehicle for making sure that for those people that have staff and assets in there, that they're contributing to something that they can then, there's a mechanism for collecting money off all of them, so that that can then be spent on their staff collectively, rather than having individual decisions and not necessarily having enough money to be able to do any one decent thing.
I guess it's important to note as well that there isn't any council funds being utilised by the trust at all, so it's completely independent of council. Councillor Wilson, did you have that?
Are we discussing both reports?
Well, yeah, we deviated. But if you've got a question specific for that one, maybe if we leave it till we can get this one, unless you want to talk.
I guess I'm just following on from Christine's question there. I guess on the with the one of the issues being the struggle to get trustees, the opportunity to have that ex officio appointee role, not necessarily to drive the bureaucratic process of being a CCO, but to have a democratically elected component on the trust as a voice back to the council table, and also an approachable voice within the community. Would that not be the advantage of having that councillor role that's been lost? And if so, what would the relationship between the trust and perhaps a representative from the Field Community Board be, in order to ensure that the objectives of the trust and what's going on in the trust also links back into the oversight of well-being for Southland, knowing that essentially when there's people living in Milford, it's classed as a community within Milford, so it does still fall under the council's obligation to look after the well-being of communities within Southland.
So I just jump in. I think the key thing there is that council gets to appoint the trustees, and it gets to appoint the independent chair, and that is the role of the independent chair. That's why they aren't one of the operators. They are there to not maybe corral, or they are there for that objective element, because within the trustee, you don't want to overweight it towards some of the larger players. So there's some provisions in there that deal with no more than two, I think it is, from either MST, Real NZ, or Southern Discoveries combined. So that gives that spread across the operators that are in Milford, and then the independent chair is there to make sure that there is no bias being brought in from those operators, that they're actually acting on behalf of the community, and then that's being reported back through the statement of intent, or indeed any other time that the chair might want to come back to council and provide an update for what's going on.
In the original deed with 7 trustees, there was a limit on how many of those particular entities could be represented, and it shifted back to 5 trustees, but that number of representations from those entities didn't shift with I guess the ratio. So has that been addressed at all with some of those changes made?
I think when considering that, it was still a majority of trustees that were going to sit outside it, because it was 2 out of 5.
So 3 to 2 rather than 7 to 2.
So we've got the recommendation there on page 369. I'm happy to move from the chair. Is there a seconder? Councillor Running-Claw. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll put all in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? And 7.11, which I think we've probably discussed most of, but I'll hand over to Simon again for this one.
Thank you for that. Look, a couple of key points to make for a start, I think, is, and Councillor Wilson has raised a few questions in his email, which was appreciated. The exemption is not to have the trust stop being a CCO. It is that it is still a CCO, which with all of the trustees continuing to be appointed by council. because that's what's required from the trust deed, but it's exempt from some of the provisions in the Local Government Act. So things like the requirement to be audited, because the financial statements would be being prepared by the council staff, and then they are subject to the wider audit of council. So there's still that function taking place. The timeframes, so the statement of intent at the moment, it's under the Act is required by the end of February, but actually that's the busiest time for the operators. So still preparing a statement of intent that would be provided to council, but if that's provided now in June, it allows the trust to meet in April or May to work through that when they're less busy, because a number of these operators who are trustees are operating their business. So that means when they're making money, when they've got the opportunity to do it, they're kind of hard to get hold of. And their attention is rightly on the summer season and making sure that they're running to their maximum. So it's elements like that we're seeking to, or the trust is seeking to benefit from having the exemption, rather than trying to avoid the kind of reporting and planning work. It's still intended to be done. It's just getting out of that cycle of this works under the Local Government Act. It doesn't necessarily work for the trust, as you've heard. It's that community is a slightly different entity running to different timeframes to what the Act is. As I said, still having that financial accountability, so that would continue, and that statement of intent is seen by the trust as an important document for reflecting what the community is after, and making sure that council can see what the intentions are for the coming year, and particularly depending on how Milford Opportunities plays out. If the trust is still in the position at that point where it's back to invoicing and getting the revenue back in, and it's going to proceed with a rec centre, then you're coming to have some larger investment at that point, and it's only right that there's still that connection back with council.
And I think as well, given that there's no financial implications for council, the timing of the statement of intent doesn't really matter for our annual plan or anything like that, where other FCOs would need to tie in with our stuff, but because we're not having any financial implications, I think that's a fair. Are there any questions on this?
My questions I emailed were just how many operators are actually contributing to the revenue of the trust?
So there's 15 operators that contribute to the trust.
And how will they be informed of these changes if it comes about today? How will they be informed of what the changes are, and also the fact that what the changes of the trust deed as well, and then how the representation works, considering that it still is a CCO? How will they?
I like to meet with MST, meet with them, and that's their management group. And I try and meet with them as often as I can, but they're pretty busy. So I would advise them as to, if this goes through, of that decision and the implications of that. So I'll just meet with them, and then of course that's the representation from all those operators within Milford. So I'll just meet with them and let them know. Also probably consider having a open forum with the community there, and just let them know the state of play as well.
How many operators are part of MST?
Well, all 15. I think the three major players are of MST, and as I say, meeting with them, they'll disperse that information as well to the rest of the operators.
Within Milford Sound Tourism, there's Real NZ, Southern Discoveries and Council are the three, but they're interacting because MST is also working with all the operators, the cruise operators, there's that element to it. And they're also good at disseminating information on behalf of the community.
So 2 operators are going to disseminate the information.
Plus I'll meet.
Trust that represents 15 operators.
Plus I'll meet with them, with the community as well, different community members about what's going on. And that'll be an open invitation to the other operators as well, and they can provide information to them.
One of the key things with MXD is that it's they are the 2 largest contributors. So in terms of value, MXD really important for that aspect. But then that meeting with that Abel's talking about with the wider group is also an opportunity to bring them up to speed. They also have a chance to consider the statement of intent shown in that.
So I guess what you're sort of getting at is it fairness for the smaller operators to have a say and be informed as well as the bigger ones? Am I right in that?
Yeah, which they will.
Yeah. Are you comfortable with that, Councillor? Yep. Okay, so we've got the Councillor Chamberlain.
Oh, just a quick question, Rob. Might be a wee bit off topic, but how do you levy each business? Is it on per passenger, X amount per passenger? Because I imagine Real Journeys will have a lot more clientele than, say, Milford Kayak. So how do you determine how much each one pays?
Technical question. So and the finance, there's a model for apportioning that. I think some of it's related to the number of staff that you've got in there and the beds. There's also some operators there who just have built infrastructure. So the levy itself is through the department, under the Department of Conservation concession. We are able to invoice those operators for that contribution towards community wellbeing. So that's sort of generally the mechanism that's used to do it. So it's not a council imposed fee.
Yeah, I understand. I just thought it might have been on a per passenger that you put through each business, or
staff and some assets.
Because the passenger thing only addresses those operators who are running cruise, and there are others that are in there that have accommodation and certainly don't have the numbers or use the cruise boats rather.
So we've got our recommendations A through to. Are you moved? Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Brien. I'll put the motion to the table. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you very much for that. Very informative for us to talk about it. And I think we'll break for lunch now, and the chair is welcome to join us for lunch as well.
Thanks very much, Your Worship.
So we'll come to our infrastructure fund program. So something that's quite a lot in the house, and this 5 minutes with that.
Thank you very much. So what we've got here is essentially a very good news story. In terms of, you can see the number of parts or projects within that program that were delivered. They've been delivered largely over the last 12 months on behalf of the community. From the feedback that we've had, it's been really well received, and it certainly addresses a number of the issues that have been raised over a few years. In particular, probably the Fraser's Beach otter seal is something that, without being part of this program, it's unlikely that it would have got done. But, certainly with the warmer summers, the dust issues for the residents there was significant when you had a westerly blowing. And again, boat ramps, what we had in the LTP was essentially just a maintenance line item. What we've been able to do is actually turn that into renewals, because of when you're looking at those ramps, they certainly were reaching the end of their life, and then whilst we had the water management in place, so that sheep pile cofferdams that were there, it just made perfect sense to actually make the most of that and do the replacement and have a much longer life left in those assets than they would have had we just done the repairs. What that has meant, though, is that some of those projects, so when the report previously came up to council, the estimated cost for some of those projects was less, certainly 3 of them significantly so, and you can see the reasons for those variations, a couple of which, particularly around the boat, I've talked about. So essentially what we're looking to do with this report is also get the unbudgeted expenditure. So that doesn't need to come out of any other the pot. It's a proportioning of the TIF funding that went towards it, and no further money is required. It's just technically saying this is what we estimated the cost of these projects to be, and it ended up higher than that for the reasons stated, and we just need to get that unbudgeted expenditure confirmed if the council is willing to do so.
Thank you, Simon. And I think just reflecting on your opening comment of it being a good news report, and it certainly is, and I think to Derek's point earlier on about the advertising, the fact of stuff that we are doing outside of the rating side of things. So this is a whole lot of infrastructure that's been funded outside of our standard rating thing. So I think it is something to acknowledge and to recognise the hard work that's been done by the team as well in getting this across the line, because it certainly saved the ratepayer a lot of money and delivered quite good results. So yeah, I certainly I'm really impressed with how we've landed with this, and even with that reallocation of that funding inside it to get it into that position where we've got a hang of a lot out of a single application. So yeah, I really appreciate the work that's been done for that. But I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Chamber.
Oh, it might be a little bit off, Pat, but is there opportunities, or has there been other money applied, to do other areas like just to that, some of the smaller towns in that area to get that same money? Is there, or is town out because it's a tourism town? This money is allocated to.
In relation to this one, that particular round, the emphasis was on those areas that have been hardest hit by, they were tourism economies and hardest hit by COVID. Other funds have had other criteria, likely that we've just seen the last tourism infrastructure round, and that won't continue. I think in terms of other funding, the Better Off funding, that's an allocation to wider community, so Tuatapere has certainly got some funding within that program. But it really comes down to whether you've got the projects for it or not.
It's more my question, is that TIF funding, is it sort of pretty much dried up? Or is it?
But I think there will be other opportunities coming forward, and I think as a council, if we're ready to sort of roll in and apply when they come available, I think keeping an eye on those is important. So, Councillor Ruttenclaw.
It's the report. It's a win-win. Isn't it great for the community out there to see these projects completed and outside funding, the opportunity for all of us to look to other funding places, for the future for the projects. So thanks so much. It's really great. We've got it to hear now, and appreciate all your work.
Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Richard. Just a query about the Tourism Infrastructure Fund. My understanding was that it's the tourism levy that pays for it. So presumably the tourism levy is starting to fill back up again, because so there's something that we should be looking at with have a good eye on how we can get into that as an option for other funding. So yeah.
Certainly, it may come through, as noted, it may come through in a different form.
Yeah.
I guess we wait and see what happens with that. I think, one of the things with this is that and I should have mentioned it in the opening, is the project delivery team have done a great job on a number of projects here that have been running concurrently. And the other thing that is really useful, I think, and is worth noting, is that opportunity to work within a program has allowed those unders and overs rather than on a project by project basis where, as that budget increased, if you were looking at it on a project line, you might say, that's out of line and we're not going to do it. But when you look at it within that whole program envelope approach, it's delivered an awful lot of benefit to the community.
Thank you, Simon, for your report. Just something that caught my eye here. Did we reduce the scope of the boat harbour toilet from, $600,001 that came in at 300,000? Did something like that happen?
No, I think it was just my understanding of it is that we got some pretty competitive pricing. What did we have? We ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4 toilets being, whereas normally we get a one-off. And when you looked at the pricing of what we'd previously, what it would cost us in Te Anau, etc., it was expecting that it would be significantly higher than what it was.
Doing something similar with the Riverton toilets, coming in at half the price.
Well, I think that is the bonus of being able to go to the market or go to those providers with, rather than just having one-offs, having that.
I just got my eye that it is made a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got the recommendation on page 388. We have someone in a position to move those. Councillor Runcorn, seconded by Councillor Keys. No further discussion. I'll put the motion on the table. All in favour, please say aye. Against? I think there would be. It's carried. Thank you, Simon, and thank you to the team as well. Right. Move on to 7.13, the Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust. And Councillor Keast may want to declare, well, did you want to? Or?
Yeah.
Maybe remove yourself from the discussion if you're uncomfortable, and Councillor Duffy potentially as well. So welcome Rachel and friends to the table.
Okay, kia ora, Miriam and councillors. I'm speaking to the Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust report, requesting that council make one appointment to the trust decision that is conditional on trust deed amendments being approved to reduce the number of council appointees from 2 to 1. As stated in the report, Councillor Duffy and Councillor Keast are currently appointed, and you're being asked to appoint just one councillor as the trust moves into a care and maintenance phase. The Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust have a meeting on the 30th of June where they will formalise the proposed changes to the trust deed, and by having this council's appointee confirmed prior to that meeting will allow the trust to streamline the process of drafting the amendments to the trust deed. This council will then be asked at a later meeting to consent to the amendments to this trust deed. Councillor Keast and Councillor Duffy may wish to speak to this further. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a conflict because we actually need you to talk to this. So,
well, thank you, Your Worship. Well, as you know, Councillor Keast and I have been on this trust since it was formed. I've certainly enjoyed my involvement with that, or it's been a privilege really in a lot of ways to be involved with it. But I believe that Councillor Keast is likely to be around this table for longer than me, so I think it's sensible for the role.
Councillor Keast, did you have any?
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, it's like Paul, it's been a real journey. At the start, well, there was the partners just prior to the establishment of this trust, and they've made real progress down there in securing that area for the future protection of the Lake Waituna and land around it. So it's a real great journey. And, yeah, I might debate with Councillor Duffy as to whether I'll be here any longer than he will, but I would be happy for my name to go forward as the representative if that's what Council decides. So, yeah.
I guess it's just an opportune time as well to acknowledge the work that the two of you have done on that trust since its inception. I've heard nothing but good stuff about it, and I think it's actually been a model for how to do something with working with a whole range of partners and collaboration. So, yeah, well done to both of you for the work that you've done on there. Anyone got any other questions or discussion? Councillor.
Just a question about resolution D.
Yeah.
When it refers to if the trust deed amendment is approved, is that being approved by the trust or is that approved by the council?
No, by the trust. Okay. So this is preempting that step so that it doesn't have to go backwards and forwards.
I believe it actually comes back to council. It does actually have to.
Final.
Yes, so they will. So the process will be the trust will obviously have their communication and discussion around it, and then when they've got the proposal is shaped up how they believe it should be shaped up, it will then come back to council, and council will need to endorse it at least.
So is that written into the trust deed, or is that written into the process of a CO or a CCO?
It's probably both, is it?
Through your worship, the trust deed outlines that the appointing councils, if there's changes to the provisions for the limited number of trustees, has to then be approved by the appointments.
So it's not standard practice throughout trusts or COs. It's kind of trust by trust depending on the deed itself.
I think there is variations, but I think that's a reasonably common cause.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Just through your worship, just E notes that if the condition and recommendation D is not met, the appointments to the Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust will continue to be Councillors Duffy and Keast. Can we make sure that we have an absolute reassurance that Councillor Duffy doesn't feel like he's under any pressure to stand down at all?
I guess it's up to Councillor Duffy to answer.
I just want what's best for the trust. And I guess if recommendation D isn't met, that you both carry on, or what happens.
According to this, yeah, you'll carry on as per usual. Yeah.
So we can essentially note that we support both councillors carrying on if that's the desire of the trust. But if the trust is only wanting there to be one, then we support Councillor Keeks being that councillor.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a pragmatic course of events, and that the trust was meant to be ending full stop, and then it was identified that the trust has got value in continuing in a scaled back form. So hence the
you're happy enough
downsizing. Getting rid of the old.
So that being said, if we slot Councillor Keeks' name into the gap in D, is someone in a position to move Councillor Menzies, seconded by Councillor Boparai? I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Nobody's against, and that's carried. 7.14, and note Councillor Ruddencourt cleared of confidence in this one, and Lord Walker requesting ownership of the full.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if you subscribe to community autonomy, then this is a pretty straightforward standard report. It is, as I said, a bit of a chicken and egg situation, and that we all agree that, well, Council hasn't decided yet, but the staff and the community have agreed it's the right way to go, but we don't want the community to go away and spend a whole lot of time and effort and potential cost setting up an entity without knowing that the actual transaction's going to happen. So that's why we've come to Council this way around. So on that note, is there any questions from councillors on this?
I think you've summed it up quite well on the start. Councillor Fraser?
Not so much a question, but just supporting. It's been a few years in the pipeline. The community's certainly gone on a journey to get to this point, and I'm very happy to take it over. And yeah, certainly very endorsed by the Already Community Board. So yeah, if there's no other questions, I'd be more than happy to move that.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Chamberlain? I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. That's carried. Nice and easy. Thank you, Kevin.
Nice and easy.
So we have 7.15, the Connected Marahuku Joint Committee and Appointments. Thank you. So now up to the... And this is on page 413 of your agenda.
Councillors and terminology. A working group was brought together by Invercargill City Council and developed the project proposal Connected Murihiku. The funding has been allocated by MB based on a joint committee being formed for the Connected Murihiku project between each of the three councils. The purpose of this report is to establish the appointments committee for the Connected Murihiku Joint Committee. As you may understand, it can be complex that both the appointments committee and the Connected Murihiku Joint Committee are both joint committees. The report is here today to request that Council establishes the appointments committee, adopts the terms of reference, and appoints or delegates the two council representatives for the appointments committee. That appointments committee will then proceed to establish the Connected Murihiku Joint Committee. Those terms of reference for that joint committee are attached in draft, but will be brought to council, I understand, again for creation of that ultimate joint committee. And so in respect of the appointments committee, just to clarify, this report is requesting that council establish and appoint the joint committee, make the delegations of two appointees, and adopt the terms of reference. In respect of the ultimate Connected Murihiku Joint Committee, this report is requesting, as you'll see in the recommendations, that you note the draft terms of reference and also to inquire and gauge Southland District Council's representation preferences for the ultimate Connected Murihiku Joint Committee.
Thank you, Danny. And I guess it's just important to note as well that this has come across the table before about the about the establishment of it, and we aren't putting any funding towards any of this, so this will just be a contribution of our time as being a member of the committee. A question that I've got, just in relation to, we're quite different to the other councils involved in this with the community team, community partnership and leadership team that we've already got. With recommendation H, where we're looking at having representation on the committee, would it be worthwhile having someone from that team, from a staff operational perspective, being involved, or is it best kept at the governance level, do you think? Just thinking with the nature of the work that we're actually doing in this council and for linking that up.
Could be valuable for the manager of that team to be on. I mean, open to that if.
Yeah, just a suggestion I just thought of, but yeah, I'll open up the for questions anyway. Do we have any questions from the council?
Just paragraph 17, Gore District Council considering appointments on the 13th. Is there any outcome from that?
I checked again this morning. I don't have any answer on that. The minutes aren't publicly available, and I haven't heard back from the ICC or board.
But they most likely would have moved forward with making a couple of appointments.
Yeah, I assume they would have, yeah. It's just detail. So the funding for this roles come from MB through the Just Transitions process, and so it'll be guaranteed for the year, but probably not.
How much funding is that?
$200,000, I think. Something around there. Don't quote me on the exact number.
Yeah, there was just came to council previously in a workshop.
So just while the staff are looking for that number, is there anyone that is interested, anyone in being involved as one of the appointees for the committee?
Yeah, this was aspirational.
I'm not expressing an interest, but I think it makes sense for the case to be involved, given her community focus over a number of years and with the council. And just for clarity, when you were talking about a staff member, that's not on the appointments committee,
No,
that's
it
on
was
the other.
actual.
Yeah.
So Councillor Geist has been voluntold is a new expression that I've learned. I'm not sure if she's comfortable with that, but she's smiling.
So is that for the
appointments committee at this stage? Is there anyone else that has any interest, or do they need to volunteer someone else? Just looking around. Councillor Fraser?
Well, I was just probably going to ask what's the time commitment like it does interest me. So very conscious I'm pretty busy at the moment as well, but
I can't imagine it would be a very involved.
it'd be a huge loser.
So, are you happy to be the second person? Councillor?
Does that exclude, if the councillors on the appointment committee can't then be on the...
No, it doesn't
the
exclude them at all. No, I'm just dealing with the agenda in order. So we've so far got Councillor Keith and Councillor Fraser. Those names in here. And then if we just look at resolution H, sorry, where's the other one about the actual committee itself?
Oh, this, the H one is the does or doesn't.
Oh, so yeah, we don't need to actually select the representation now, do we? I guess that would come out of the terms of reference later on. Or do we need to select that now? No.
It's
Later on,
whether
the
the
next
council
step.
does
Yeah.
want to have it or whether they don't want to.
Yeah.
But it's not asking for a person.
Yeah. So, H is, do we want someone to be on the actual committee itself, or two people, say, potentially?
Through you, Mr Chair, the other option that Invercargill City Council has discussed at their meeting to consider the appointments committee was that there may be a possibility of having a shared council representative. So either, and the preference is from discussions I've had with Rhiannon at Invercargill City Council that there's probably not room to have two Southland District Council specific representatives on the ultimate committee. The intention is that it would be one shared representative because they're also going to have community representatives and iwi representatives and they don't want it to get too unwieldy.
And then that, to my earlier point, might be a good role for that actual staff level to be involved potentially as well, if there's an appetite from the table and the team. But do we have support of having representation on that committee? Cool, so I'll go through the motions here. So we actually covered off everything we need to take off. So we've got two councillors and we've got H. So someone in a position to move those motions? Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Menzies. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion on the table. All in favour, please say aye. Thank you to the two councillors. Right, 7.16, the Southland Museum and Art Gallery Trust Board presenting their draft statement of intent. Robin, this is on page 433 if you opened it.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. As you'll be aware, this report requests Council to consider and receive the draft Southland Museum and Art Gallery Statement of Intent. It's proposed that a piece of feedback is provided to the Trust Board that relates to the non-financial performance measures outlined in the draft statement, and the suggested feedback there is outlined in Recommendation E. The other Southland Territorial authorities are also considering the draft Statement of Intent this month. The Trust Board did make some late updates to its draft Statement of Intent on 9 June just to ensure the statement clearly outlined the revised role of the Trust Board, which is to look after the museum collection. And it was to ensure that the role of the Trust Board is clear for the incoming board members because they're in that process of changing from the interim to the skills-based board. Currently, Mr McIntosh is an interim board member on the Trust Board. The board will only have a small window of time to incorporate the feedback from the councils prior to releasing its final statement before 1 July 2023. So the recommendations for this report are on page 434, and I am, and probably Mr McIntosh is quite happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do you have any comment you'd like to make, Mr Chief Executive?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm looking forward to the new board being in place. Look, I think the statement of intent wouldn't have been required at all had the process of appointing the new trust board not been delayed, because it was intended that they would have been in place before the new financial year. That's very close to happening, so we just have the formality now of getting through this. There could well be some feedback that other than recommendation E. But I will not be remaining on this trust once the interim role is completed.
Cool, thank you, Cameron. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Bishop. I'm reading through the statement. I'm unsure why 3.5 is in there, which is a discussion about the Southland Regional Heritage Committee, given this is the SMAG. So, someone could explain the relationship of that would be useful, not that I'm wanting to delay agreement to the statement of intent, because I think it's necessary in order to move things on.
So that the alignment with community outcomes.
Yes. The Southland Regional Heritage Committee is a funder of it, but it's statement of intent for the board.
I think that refers to strategy, creating and implementing a strategy. So the strategy is actually that we've been using. It's been the story of Southland that was compiled by Lloyd Essler and Russell Beck and Kathy McPhee, and it actually is a very good summary of Southland's stock of heritage, if you like, including all forms of it, and recommendations for future activity. We did actually put together a bit of a draft framework for a new updated strategy, but that hasn't been taken further.
So you're comfortable with that? So
Well, I think in that context it's okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe a comment just along the lines that the SMAG statement of intent, even though it's referencing the Regional Heritage Committee because of the funding stream, the SMAG statement of intent can't bind the Regional Heritage Committee in any way. That's an independent, it's a separate committee can make its own.
Are you comfortable with that?
It's an odd way it's written.
Yes, well.
Or do you want to add that into the
enables it to go through and with the chief executive's recommendation there. I still don't see the relevance of it.
So do you want to provide that in the feedback to them, or do you want to just?
Yes, well, it could be feedback, and I guess the other concern would be that the feedback we've provided in the past is now third year in the making and we're doing it again. So I'm not sure what the difficulty is in making change after the first lot of feedback.
So, through your worship, last year we did provide 3 elements of feedback and the other 2 were incorporated. It was just the one relating to the non-financial performance targets.
No further. Sorry, Councillor Lyons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, just on feedback, I recall having a presentation here one day and I asked, where does all the money get spent? It's a big chunk of money for our ratepayers. And when the Invercargill has a new museum, presumably this collection will be housed in it. Is there any need for further spending on housing the collection?
Well, I think there's about 4 million artefacts, and I think a lot of them are actually owned by Southland region rather than Invercargill. So I think that's what it's a regional museum rather than Invercargill, albeit they own the building, but the collection's actually owned by Southland as a whole. But someone might want to add to that if I haven't covered enough in that answer.
Well, the funding doesn't cover building aspects, it's simply the curation and preservation of the collection.
It'd be interesting to know how they spend nearly, well, it's over 2 million, isn't it? Housing.
What do you mean by over 2 million?
Well, 600,000, over 600,000 here, 1.2 from ICC.
No, the 1.2 is the total. The 1.2 is the total that goes to them.
Oh, how much does ICC put towards it?
About 700,000 or 800,000. It's about 700,000, I think. I mean, it's on a per head basis.
We're putting in quite a bit then.
Eh?
Per head, we're putting in quite a bit.
Yeah, well, we're putting in the same as for Invercargill on a per head basis, on a per ratepayer basis.
And then the Regional Heritage also funds the likes of the Te Hahoi Museum as well, provides funding for some of our district museums.
Not much funding there though, Rob. That's most of it into Invercargill. Well, you did mention that in the future this council is going to be responsible for 5% of the current current budget. Well, here's 20% of that.
Cool. So just keeping it on topic too, we're deviating a little bit.
But long-term plan.
Yeah. Relevant. But yeah, are there any further questions? No hands. Right, we've got the recommendation there, A through to E, and F over the page by the looks of it. Is there someone in a position to move those? Councillor Ravenclaw, do we have a seconder?
Your Worship, sorry, was there the update relating to the Regional Heritage Strategic? Is there going to be a change? Or
Passing that feedback on. Yeah, so that would be inside E, wouldn't it?
What do we want to say here?
Bear with us for a second. The alignment comes in 3.5.
In respect of this, with the financial forecast, there's actually nothing in the line for trustees' remuneration.
So did you want to?
Presumably will be added at some stage.
There was a report on trustees' remuneration came at an earlier meeting, wasn't there?
So what do they want to put in?
So what have you got to say there?
Okay, forward feedback on clause 3.5 alignment of community outcomes relating to.
So the relevance of that whole part. In essence, is that what you sort of?
Well, it's just there's no guarantee of future funding on this from the Heritage Committee, but that was my note about whether it belongs in the statement of intent.
So whether 3.5 belongs in the statement of intent is probably a.
it's just relating to Southland Regional Heritage Committee though.
Secondly, that the financial forecast will be affected because the trustees' remuneration is not in there. Already a loss forecasted,
So noting that feedback, is someone in a position to move that? Councillor Mendes, are you happy to move? Someone happy to second? Councillor Ravenclaw? No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That's carried. That was the last item on the agenda. So I will.
Number 22, Don, probably gives you.
Ask the Chief Executive.
Lots of funding on 22, paragraph 22, is how much each council gives as ICCs.
Kia ora, Te Marino, Ngāmu Te Moana, hei huarahi mā tātou, rangi nei, aroha atu, araha mai, tātou e tātou, katoa, ui e tai. May peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, and bind us all together.
Well, we're not quite finished yet though, we've got some workshops and I'll declare the meeting closed.
Total is 2 million.